Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Nancy has always dreamed of becoming a doctor. She went to school and thought after graduation she would go to medical school to graduate and start her professional career. Well, daughter, have you changed your mind? Her mom asked her all the time. Of course not. This is my dream, and I will achieve and go to it, answered her. All right. Well, I'm counting on you. When you have a doctor in the family, it's wonderful. A woman came up to her and hugged her. They lived in a small town, and when Nancy was about to enter school, she learned about the construction of the Baikal-Amur main line. The girl herself did not know why she was so beckoned there, but she wanted it. No, my dear, you first enroll from study, and then we will already think about the construction of the century, the woman said. All right. Nancy could not disobey her mother. They were always together, always listening to each other. And now Nancy couldn't just leave the woman she loved more than anyone else in the world. She enrolled in college. The years of study began. Everything went well. One might even say perfectly. Nothing the girl wanted so much as to fulfill her dream and go to the place where she thought she was expected. First year, second year, third year practicum. She liked everything, but she wanted to help people. Class, are you going to the dance tonight? Her friend, with whom they shared a room, asked her. No, I'm not, she answered her. And indeed, Nancy didn't go anywhere. She stayed at home, studying everything. Studied encyclopedias. Really wanted to know more. She was one of the smartest on the course, too. The teacher was always praised and prophesied a brilliant future for the girl. And when the years of study were behind Nancy, as the best student on a Komsomol ticket was sent to the construction of the highway. How had she been looking forward to it? And now there was an opportunity to get a job, to get a good salary, and with it everything else. But for a long time, the girl did not have to disappear there in that cold land on the shore of Lake Baikal, but she didn't know it yet. Daughter, where will you go? Her mother hugged her goodbye. Mom, for the good life, she told her. What a good life. The woman didn't understand it. We'll see, the girl told her. She waved goodbye. Then she got on a bus and went to the station. There she bought a train ticket, and now she was on her way to her dream. Nancy had heard many different stories about this construction site. She realized that it would be hard, but she still aspired to go there. She arrived, indeed, got a job as a medic. They gave her a raise. So far, she couldn't say anything bad about it. Not a couple months later, she met Noah. He was a handsome young man who was always joking, thanking, singing songs on his guitar. He just saw the fiery girl and immediately approached her. Are you here alone? He asked her instead of greeting her that day. Yes. Who should I be with? The girl was surprised. But no husband, no children, no one. He wondered. No, she shook her head. We'll be friends. I'm Noah. He gave her his hand. And I'm Nancy. She said cheerfully. It's really nice to meet you. It seemed as if Noah had nothing more to say right now. Though before, when Nancy saw him in companies, he was always joking about everyone and saying different things. And that made me feel embarrassed for Nancy. What are you going to do this weekend? The young man asked her. I don't know yet. What do you have to offer? She asked. And let's get out into nature. Put up a tent, a leg, make a fire in a cauldron, something boiled, he suggested to her. How romantic does that sound? Of course I agree, Nancy answered him. And over the weekend they had it just as Noah told the girls. Couldn't help but like it. Then they'd walk hand in hand. He'd walk her home and to wherever she needed to go. And already the young people themselves did not notice how it happened, but they began to live together. Nancy thought she was such a hostess. She tried to cook something tasty for her boyfriend, but they didn't live together for 8 months. Like Noah said, he had to leave. How long will you be gone? Nancy asked him then. You know, I don't know myself, but I think I'll be back soon. He smiled at me and touched the tip of his nose. I'll be waiting for you. She said to him, and gave him a hug. "Good, and I will definitely come back," mouthed Noah, kissed her, and got into the car, which was now heading to the station. The second month passed, and when the third Noah had started, there was still no Noah. But Nancy realized that she was expecting a baby. This news both pleased her and saddened her. The girl realized that she could have the baby here, but if she did it at home, where her mother would be around, it would be several times easier for her than alone. Noah never arrived. Nancy inquired where he lived from his friends, but they didn't know anything. So she packed her bags and headed back. It was bitter to realize that as soon as her dream came true, she had trusted, one might say, the first man she met, and he did this to her. "Mai, you're home." She entered the apartment and immediately called out to the woman. Nancy came out of the kitchen. "Yes, it just so happened that I had to come back." She waved her hands in the air. "So come in, tell me, what happened?" The woman was getting worried. "Mom, calm down. Nothing happened. Everything's fine, except you're about to become a grandmother. But I don't think that's bad news for you." The girl stood by the table and ran her fingers over the tablecloth. "What? How did this happen?" The mom was shocked because her daughter always was. "Look, she checked 100 times before she did anything. Don't you know how this happens? A man and a woman meet, and then she stops talking." "Yeah, I know how it happens. How it happened for you," sighed the mother. But she realized there was nothing she could do now. The only thing to do was to wait for the deadline and then bring up a grandson or granddaughter. "Mom, everything will be all right." The daughter hugged her mom. "What about your work?" turned to her woman. "Nothing yet, but I think, with the recommendations that I was given from the old place of work, I'll be taken." The girl was sure of it. "That's great. When they day with it while the term is small, you have to go to settle," her mom had told her. Nancy had done just that, but now she wasn't accepted. "Nancy, don't worry. As soon as you have a baby, be sure to come to us, and we will take you in." The head doctor told her, "I will." Surely she promised him, though she thought she would not be taken anywhere now. It was no use. They lived in a small apartment where the girl had grown up. Now only her mother brought money into the house. It turned out that Nancy was sitting on her neck. "Mama, don't you worry. When the baby is born, I'll definitely go to work, and we'll have everything." She told the woman, "I'm not worried. I know you're a hard worker, and you'll do whatever you set your mind to. You'll do it." Her mother would come up to her and give Nancy a hug, and that's exactly what she needed from her. Time passed quickly, and now she's in the last month of her pregnancy. Everything had been fine up to that point. So Nancy didn't even think she would have any complications. She did. Everything was fine. She was seen at the same hospital where she came to apply for a job. The doctors made her feel welcome. They knew that perhaps the girl would become their future colleague. A wonderful baby boy was born, who was named Charles. When Nancy saw him, she stopped doubting. If before she had any doubts about whether she was doing it for nothing or not, now she was sure that it was her son, and she would do everything to make him stand on his feet. Grandmother as well as mother doted on her grandchildren. When Charles was 8 months old, Nancy received a phone call. The head doctor told her that if she was going to go to work for them, she had to do it now. The mother turned to the woman that my kin, she was always ready to come to her daughter's aid. "They're calling me to go to work, but to do that, you need to stay with Charles," she said. "Sure, what are you talking about? I'll stay." The woman worked in a heavy industry, and now on some level she was even glad that she would have to quit. Nancy started work as she had expected. She was well received. Everyone socialized with her. The employees helped each other with everything. At first, the girl was put as an assistant surgeon. She understood a lot about it, so it could not be otherwise. Time passed. The son grew up. Nancy worked. When Charles was 2.5 years old, the women decided it was time for him to go to kindergarten. There's a regime with his father and everything else. There were practically no lines in those days, so the boy went there with his peers. "So, Nancy, how is your work there?" her mother asked her. "You know, it's fine," she said. "I don't get to say hello." The woman sighed and sat down on a stool. "What's wrong with you? Why didn't you say anything?" The daughter was surprised then. "What to say? I thought it would go away, but it doesn't go away." The woman said sadly, "So I'll talk to the head doctor, and we'll probably put you in our hospital," Nancy told her. The mother didn't mind, but she didn't want to go to the hospital. But once Nancy had made up her mind, she had to follow through. The woman was admitted. It was mostly Nancy herself who took care of her. Of course, she couldn't stay in the hospital overnight. When she was on duty, she'd go home to her son. And when she was on duty herself, then both her son and she were all at Nancy's room. The woman was discharged. She saw that the girl was crying. She realized that no pills, no surgery, nothing would no longer help her mother, and barked out of herself for having missed the moment when the disease had just begun. "Daughter, don't get upset. Everything will be fine," her mother told her. "Mother, I blame myself for the state you are in now." At first, the daughter cried at the psychiatric hospital, but then she could no longer hold back her tears when she talked or looked at her mother. That day, they escorted Charles to September 1st. He stood at the line so beautiful, so happy. Grandma was already getting around, but Nancy couldn't deny her that last opportunity to be happy for her grandson. She got a wheelchair from the hospital, put her mother in it, and drove her. And that same evening, she felt sick. "Grandma, please open your eyes." Sitting and crying beside the bed was the grandson. The mother came running to Nancy's screams. She saw that the woman was no longer with them. She took her son by the hand and led him out of that room, and went to the kitchen, sat down at the table, and wept bitterly. Then there was a funeral. Charles cried a lot there too. He couldn't understand what had happened to his grandmother. He asked her to get up, but she would never get up again. Nancy realized that now all the burdens of raising a child and everything else would fall on her shoulders. When the boy was in elementary school in 4th grade, Nancy was offered a promotion. She had finally become a real surgeon, and she herself had some assistants. It couldn't have been more gratifying. But at the same time, the work was multiplied. The son became more and more independent. He could prepare his own lunch and dinner often, because his mother was almost always away. She would come running in the morning. She managed to sleep for a few hours while Charles was at school. Then she tried to pay attention to her son somehow. They'd do things together. They'd do homework. They'd go out. But it was very rare. Of course, Nancy thought about all this, that you can't let things go. But she couldn't help it. By this time, she had never met anyone. Although there had been suitors, men confessed their love to her, gave her flowers, called her for a date, but she chose work and her son, realizing that if she got a man, she wouldn't have enough energy for anything. One day, Nancy was returning from night duty and saw several young men in front of the entrance. She went over. One of the guys was her Charles. "What are you doing here?" she asked him. "Oh, Mom, come home. I'll be right up," he answered her, staggered. She realized she'd missed something, and her son might have gotten mixed up with some bad company. "No, I told you right now we're going home together." She took him by the sleeve of his jacket and dragged him toward the driveway. "Get off." He yanked his arm out. "How do you talk to your mother?" She didn't get it. "As I want, so I talk," he answered defiantly. Nancy thought the boy didn't want to appear weak in front of his classmates and friends, or worse, a mama's boy. And the woman also realized at that moment that the kid was going through transition. She was on her way home. Tears dripped from her eyes. Nancy realized to herself that she had devoted herself to her work and paid little attention to her son. And now, when Charles came up to the apartment and sat beside her on the couch, she tried to talk to him as gently as she could. "Charles, you realize that times are hard right now. If you keep living like this, you're not going to make it," she told him. "Mom, why didn't you tell me this when I was growing up?" Only now when I've already done something wrong. Or maybe I did it to spite you, to draw your attention to myself. He said it with a hint of anger in his voice. I'm sorry, darling, but I'm doing the best I can for us. I work. I bring money into the house. If it wasn't for me, who would do it? She told him, while she was crying. The son went to bed, and when he woke up, apparently, he thought about everything. He went to his mother and hugged her. I'm sorry, he said to her, and she saw that he really said it from the bottom of his heart. Well, it's all right. Sit down at the table. She said it for him. She grabbed her keys, grabbed her purse, and headed out. Are you going back to work? Charles asked her. But you wouldn't understand. It's my job. It brings us income. That's why you have things. Everything else is food on the table, she told him. The guy didn't argue. But now he didn't do anything out in the open anymore. Everything on the sly so his mother wouldn't find out. Before graduating from high school, the guy slipped to a C, and his mother had to take a vacation to sit with him at lessons and pull him up. Have you been doing so well all these years? Look at this. She opened the diary in front of him, which is full of twos and various notes from teachers. Oh, Mom, who needs this school? He said. Well, you don't need it, but I do. There's only a little bit left. Try harder, she asked him. And Charles tried. He had a few C's on his diploma, but he had graduated. And now he and his mom were standing at the line, and it was graduation. Do you remember when her son turned to her? What did she ask him? Like when we were standing at the line, when I went to first grade. And Grandma was with us, Charles muttered to her. Nancy realized the exact moment she had missed the child. That now that so many years had passed, he still remembered the grandmother he loved so much. Nancy, would you come into my office, please? The head of the hospital asked her. Sure. Something's wrong. She wanted to know now. How do you release me? Or I'll wait for you at my place, and you'll find out calmly. The man answered her. She did not understand what to expect from this conversation. Usually the chief physician's office was not summoned just like that. Nancy stepped over the threshold. She tried not to look at the man sitting behind the desk. Have a seat, the man in the white coat told her. She sat down on a chair that was near the desk. So, Nancy, I'd like to offer you the position of chief of surgery, the head doctor said. That she was very surprised, because there were no prerequisites for it. Why are you so surprised? You are an excellent surgeon, and I think you can handle being in charge of a few more surgeons. He smiled. Good, she nodded. Does that mean you're in? Well, yes, it's worth a try. And now that she had a new position, and she realized that the salary would be higher, the woman decided to sell the apartment they were living in now and buy something bigger. Charles, what do you think? She asked her son. I'm all for it, he answered. The young man was preparing to enter the institute. Of course, his mother had chosen him, but he was just as much as she didn't mind giving it a try. Now that the apartment was bigger than Nancy's, it seemed to breathe more freely. Charles was away studying, so she missed him a lot. But the boy had promised her he'd come over more often, and he kept his promise. At one point, he didn't come alone, but a girl was with him. Mom, don't be surprised. It's Miranda. We're friends. The boy told her. I'm not surprised, his mom replied. But of course, she thought to herself that her son could have told her earlier that he had started dating a girl. Today, they sat for a while. And then the woman had to run out for the night shift. Charles and Miranda met only a few months ago. They were studying at the same institute, and one day their groups were brought together for a class together. There they met eyes. The guy didn't realize what had happened to him. He just saw her and fell in love. Can I meet you? He caught up with her in the hallway after class. She turned to him. Hi, I'm Charles, he said, smiling. I'm Lilia, she answered calmly. Nice to meet you. You have such a beautiful name, the young man said then. You have a nice one too. It was obvious that she did not mind this acquaintance. Afterwards, they went to a cafe. The guy treated the girl with sweets, ice cream, cakes, And when it became clear that they lived in the same dormitory, it became fun. "How come I've never seen you before?" Charles asked. "I don't know. I've never seen you either." She laughed. From that moment, the young man and the girl began to prepare for subjects together, to go to the institute and back. But on one of the days there was an unpleasantness. Girlfriends invited the girl to a birthday party. "Will you come with me?" she asked the young man. "Look, probably not. What would I do there? I don't know anyone." "Okay, I'll go alone then. I hope you don't mind," she said and shrugged her shoulders. "Sure, go," he answered her. That evening, they went out that night at Miranda's friend's house. Her parents weren't home, and they had set up there unbeknownst to her. But in the middle of the night, perhaps the neighbors called or the parents themselves decided to come back. They came home and saw a horrible scene. 4 girls who were friends just lying around. A birthday party. Not only were they celebrating with pies and salad, but they'd bought hard liquor. "What's going on here?" Father asked sternly. At that moment, the girlfriends stood up. They were escorted out of the house. The girl had nowhere to go, so she went to the dormitory. The janitor saw her there. And the next day, everything was known at the institute. The scandal was hushed up, but the girl was expelled, and now she was studying at a local school. Of course, it was not as prestigious as the institute, but at least it was something. "So why didn't your parents intervene?" was Nancy curious when her son told her the story. "Because I don't have any. My father's out there somewhere, but nobody knows where he is. And my mother was stabbed in a fight by a roommate she'd been living with for years," Miranda told her and tilted her head. "God, what scary stories have you had in your life?" Nancy crossed herself. "To us now, when we graduate, I think we will come to our town and live here." Looked the son at his mother. "Yes, of course, I don't mind." Glory was happy that her child trusts her and they want to live in her apartment. Now, as long as they were home almost every weekend. Miranda was always there for Charles. The woman liked the girl. She was a homemaker, did everything around the house, never sassy, never rude. So she took her in like family. "Mom, we'll probably get married," said to her one day Charles, "You've graduated from the institute. What's left?" She pointed to his fingers. Indeed, Charles had only a few months left to study. Then there was practice, defense, state exams, and the diploma was in hand. Here at the institute, Charles studied differently than at school, took everything more seriously. He realized that his future career would be connected with it. So he didn't rest. Graduation was over, and Charles and Miranda went to his mother's house. They were living here now. "Okay, guys, come on. You wanted to get married. And while it's summer, we've got to make the most of it. Warmth, berries, different vegetables. We got it all. We've got it all. So don't delay. Go to the registry office and apply. Mommy, you better kiss her on the cheek, son." There weren't many relatives who could be invited to the wedding. Friends of the young man, and the girl was also few. So the mother suggested celebrating the wedding at home. But home is home, Charles shrugged. On the appointed day, Miranda went to her room to put on her dress. It wasn't even a wedding dress, but a simple white floor-length dress that was fitted to her figure. "What a beautiful dress you have," mouthed Nancy, when she saw her future daughter-in-law. "Charles gave it to me," she replied. "Look, I've got a present for you," said Nancy. "What is it?" The girl didn't understand. Why would she want to give it now? "Look." The woman opened the slate and took out from there a snow-white hat, to which a veil was sewn. "What a beautiful thing," Miranda said at the time. "Yes, that's what we used to take on a trip to a foreign country. I bought one for myself there. I don't know why or where I wanted to go in it, but now I realize why I did it." Nancy placed the hat on the girl's head, and she became even more festive, even more like a bride. They went to the registry office, and the young people signed. The guests gave flowers, congratulated. It was possible to go home. They could go home, where Nancy had already set the tables. Everything went very cheerfully. Toasts were said. There were some contests. When the guests had gone, Nancy collected all the dishes, took them into the kitchen, and began to wash them. "Let me help you." Miranda came over. "Oh, come on. Go on. You've got a young husband there." Nancy laughed at her. "What are you doing? Look at this mountain of dishes." "I'll help," said the girl. Together, they did it quickly. Charles joined them at the very end. He took towels and wiped the plates and glasses. All was well with the Yum family. Charles got a very good job. Of course, not without his mother's help. He was now earning good money and also had weight in the community. When 2 years had passed since the wedding, Nancy called Miranda to talk to her. "Daughter, you're not doing well with the children," she told her. "I don't know," shrugged the one. "Maybe go to the hospital to get checked out," her mother-in-law suggested to her. "Wait, we are still young. Everything will be in time." Miranda didn't want to find out there was something wrong with her. "All right. Well, don't let it be too late," Nancy warned her. And then Charles was offered a position in some distant city. "Where is this?" Was Nancy looking at him? "Oh, come on, Mom. It's a city of millions. Things will be very different there," he said. And now they were getting ready to leave. "Miranda, why aren't you going?" My mother-in-law was surprised. "We decided that I'll go first. I'll get settled there, and then I'll come." "Miranda," Charles replied. Understandably, there was little joy, because Nancy realized she would not be alone. It wasn't until her son left that her mother learned the real reason why Miranda was staying here. "Mom, I want to talk to you," said her daughter-in-law to her, and led her to the sofa for both of them to sit down. "What's wrong? Didn't you understand? I'm expecting a baby," said the daughter-in-law. "Well, that's good news. That's good news." She jumped up off the couch. Nancy started pacing the room. "You realize that this is not a good time to have children. I wanted to ask you to arrange for me to have an abortion," Miranda said. Scary words for Nancy. "Are you completely skillful? What kind of abortion?" "Not just over my dead body," insisted the woman. After that, Miranda continued to live with Nancy. She and Charles called, texted. They never spoke again. When the day of the birth came, Nancy was there for her. She helped with everything. And when the baby was born, she was practically the first one to hold him. Miranda will call it. She walked up to her sister-in-law and handed the baby over. "Jacob," she answered. "Oh, what a name," said the woman. And Charles came up with it. The daughter-in-law looked at the child and realized that she would have to stay here for at least another year. "Don't worry, I'll help with everything. I'll be there for you," her mother-in-law reassured her. "I'm not worried," the girl sighed. And then when they got home, it started. Nipples, diapers, skates, hospitals, whatever. When Jacob was a little over a year old, Nancy came home from work and saw her suitcases packed in the hallway. "Where do you think you're going?" She looked at her daughter-in-law. "Mom, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to my husband," Miranda told her. "What about Jacob?" The woman looked at her fearfully. "Jacob is staying with his grandmother," Miranda said. She took her suitcases, opened the door, and left the apartment. But how could it be? Nancy stood in the hallway, confused. She didn't have a job after all. She didn't need one at all. A small child who would stay with her. But there was nothing left to do. So Nancy went to the room where the little boy was sleeping. "But hello, my darling. What are we going to do with you?" She sat down beside his crib and patted his back. Since Jacob didn't go to kindergarten yet, and they hadn't gotten a prescription yet, Nancy realized that she would not be able to handle either Jacob or the job, if she did both. So she went to the head doctor and asked for a leave of absence. "Sure, Nancy, look, how many years have you worked? Never taken that vacation. And if you did, you went out almost every day," the man told her. He would have sent her himself, but she never agreed. "Thank you." Nancy thanked him then. The woman came home. She did everything for her grandson, cooking for him, washing, ironing, doing what his mother should be doing now. But what? Jacob Dance. We got a ticket to kindergarten, she told him then. The boy smiled. And so the next day in the morning they go there. For 2 weeks, the grandmother took her grandson to kindergarten. When the adaptation passed, she realized that now Jacob would stay in the kindergarten from 8 to 5. It was possible to go to work, but what would happen with night duty? She did not understand. At first, the woman left her grandson with a neighbor, a girlfriend, or someone else. The older Jacob got, the worse and worse his temper got. He was disobedient. No words could work on him. In kindergarten, he fought all the time. When he was in the older group, he could bite. His parents were always complaining about him. Nancy didn't know what to do, and she found only one way out of this situation: to leave work. Everyone saw her off, even those who were no longer working. She cried for how many years she had given to this profession. And now, it would seem, there is still strength, but it is necessary to leave. Don't be upset. Everything will be fine. Take care of your grandson's upbringing. Don't think about anything. Her colleagues told her. Okay, thank you, she replied. Now the woman was at home. Apart from raising her grandson, she did nothing else, but it took up so much time and energy. And she was constantly worried about him. Nervous. It raised her blood pressure. When Jacob was in 4th grade, she received a phone call. Hello, she said excitedly into the phone, realizing that the class teacher wouldn't just call. Nancy, what's wrong? Jacob is fighting with the seniors again. His parents want to talk to you. The woman was telling her. Of course I'll be there, Nancy worried. And the next day, she went to the principal's office, where the other kids' parents were waiting for her. The woman was so worried that her blood pressure was up, and she thought she just wouldn't make it to school. They were sitting in the office. The principal was saying something. The other parents were saying something too. But Nancy didn't understand anything right now. When the principal noticed this, he quickly called an ambulance. The paramedics came straight to the school. Nancy was taken away. She was admitted to the hospital. Oh, I can't go to the hospital, she said. I've got a little grandson. I've got to look after him. Then the doctor went to meet her. He gave her a drip, gave her an injection, and let her go home in the evening on the condition that tomorrow she would come again and spend the day here. The older Jacob got, the worse and worse he got. Nancy didn't understand at all how normal parents with normal upbringing could raise a child like that. In 7th grade, he started smoking. His grandmother immediately noticed the smell of tobacco from him. It got even worse. Nancy called her son repeatedly. Charles, do you realize what's going on here with your son? I can't rein him in at the wrong age. I've got heart palpitations. I'm always worried, nervous. She told him. Mom, you understand. I can't come now, he answered. He and his wife only sent money to the grandmother and did nothing else, as if it was not theirs. It was the son at all. And Nancy continued to raise Jacob. She did everything she could to keep him in the apartment. Sometimes she wouldn't even let him go to school, so he wouldn't do anything wrong. But he still found ways to see his friends. Jacob, I can't take it anymore, his grandmother told him once. The kid was in 9th grade. That's all I need. I'm gonna finish 9th grade, and I'm gonna leave. He told her. Where will you go? How will you go? She made big eyes and her heart started beating faster again. I'm going to leave school to go on with my life. Of course I'll be at your place, because I have nowhere else to go. Jacob didn't seem to be talking. I made a condition. What school? Jacob, my family. You have to go to the 10th grade, finish normal school, go to the institute, then work. Grandma read it. Who needs your institute now? Did you look at her? Everyone always needed it. The woman didn't understand why he was so stubborn. Grandmother sighed, but there was nothing she could do. Now at her age, she realized that she was no authority to her grandson. Probably not to her son either, because in all the years they had been away, they had never once come to visit mother and son. The grandmother didn't know where they were at all. Jacob went to college. as he wanted to. He wasn't paying any attention. What was his grandmother telling him? What did she want? What was she doing? The most important thing was to have a place to sleep. In the morning, his grandmother would make him some breakfast. He would wash his face, leave, and come back either late in the evening or quite at night, and sometimes he could stay up until morning. It made Nancy's heart pick up again. She knew she should go to the hospital, but she didn't because she realized her grandson would be alone again. Somehow she wanted to do something and couldn't remember. Nancy sat down on the couch. She looked out the window and went over in her head what she had planned an hour ago, but couldn't remember it. And then she began to notice that she was starting to have some memory lapses. She forgot her sister-in-law's name. When a neighbor asked her, she couldn't remember where the threads were in the house. Now the woman became afraid to go out on the street, because once when she went out and then came back home, she mixed up the entranceway and entered a completely different apartment number, also as if to erase from memory. She reflexively went up to the floor she lived on, wanted to open the door, but not the one she lived in. "What do you want here?" "Did a man open it then?" "I live here," said Nancy. "No, you're confused. I live here." I slammed that door in her face. She came out of the driveway and was spotted by Nancy's neighbor. "What are you standing there for?" She came up to her. Molly. Nancy exhaled a sigh of relief at what she recognized. "Molly. Thank goodness, at least I remember you," she muttered. And they hugged. "Did something happen to you?" Molly asked her. "Yes, I did. I got the wrong entrance and went into the wrong apartment." She told her, "Look, you can't go out alone right now. What if you go out and then forget where you live and never come back?" Her neighbor warned her. Today she took her to her apartment. Jacob could see that something was wrong with Grandma, but he didn't ask her anything, and she didn't tell him either. When he had almost finished his education at the college and was about to receive his diploma, Jacob met a young girl. Obviously, he had nowhere to take her, so he brought her to his grandmother's house. "Meet Kelly. This is Kelly," he said as they entered the apartment. He gestured to the girl to develop and walked to his room. "Are you going to eat?" asked him Nancy. Now practically all over the house where the woman lived there were notes spread out. What to cook, what to say, where to go, what to take. If she remembered, she wrote it down immediately. In those moments when her memory came back, she would try to quickly write something down or think about something. Before, when she worked at the hospital, she never thought this could happen to her. Now Jacob she remembered and knew. But Kelly was a new person to her almost every day. "Nancy, hello," the girl said to her as they bumped into each other in the hallway. "So who's bouncing off her?" "Here we go again. Jacob, your grandmother, has gone crazy. Don't pay attention to her," the young man kept telling her. "You see, I don't like all this there. She did this here. She forgot to do that. We can't get rid of her somehow," Kelly asked him once. "You what?" "That's my grandmother. And if my parents come over, what am I gonna tell them? My fiancé didn't like Grandma, so we put her in a nursing home or something," he told her. "But no, maybe she'll go to the hospital for a while. They'll fix her up, do whatever she needs." The girl offered another option. "No, let her live in her room, walk around the house. She's doing fine here." For the first time in his life, Jacob took his grandmother's side. He saw how she suffered, how she was always looking for something, even though it was on the surface. "Okay, I didn't know what else to say." Kelly, she kept looking at Grandma, and no to help her, just grinned and went off to her room. "Jacob needs to go to the store," Grandma was telling him. She definitely needed an escort because she had already tried to leave the house alone and then barely found her apartment. So now she had an alarm clock set on a certain day, at a certain time, when she had to go shopping. She also had the same alarm for the pills she needed to take. "Okay, wait," he answered her and started to get ready. Right now, though the guy didn't feel like it. He would get dressed and take his grandmother to wherever she needed to go. Just recently, the woman had given her grandson money to buy himself a car, and now he could get around in it. They went with the grandmother to the store, bought groceries, brought them home, laid them out, and only then did he go somewhere else. Kelly stayed home most of the time while Jacob was working or out with his friends. She spent all day talking on the phone or lying in front of the TV. After Jacob and Grandma came home from the store, Kelly figured out what he could do with Grandma so he wouldn't have to answer to anyone. But the girl didn't say anything to anyone. They continued to live all together. Now the girl, so that Nana would remember her and not scare her every time she tried to be around. She helped Nancy cook peeled potatoes, cut onions, and did everything her grandmother asked her to do. No one understood a thing. And when the next time came to go to the store, Jacob was not home. So the girl offered the woman her help. They walked to the store together. Kelly took the basket, gave it to the woman, and when she disappeared between the shelves, Kelly safely left the supermarket, leaving Nancy here alone. But the woman didn't know about it yet, so she strolled calmly through the store and thought nothing of it when the basket was full and she had to go to the checkout to pay. And then the woman stood up in confusion and started looking around. Now it seemed to her that she had come here with someone, but she couldn't remember with whom. And what should she do now? She doesn't know. And she didn't know where she was either. Nancy put the grocery basket on the floor. She just turned her head back and forth, thinking that her grandson had lingered somewhere near some shelf and would come to her now. Nancy walked between the rows, looking for Jacob. She wanted to shop to ask someone, but Nancy couldn't afford it. There are so many people here. She was just afraid of them all. Some time passed, but there was still no one. Then she walked out of the store to avoid attracting any attention. Kelly went back home. She was not to say happy, but happy that she had come up with such a plan. And now, even when Jacob came home, she would tell him that the grandmother had left the house alone and had not returned to the girl. It seemed like she had everything planned out. And most importantly, the plan was perfect. She went to the kitchen, decided to cook a holiday dinner. The girl knew only 2 recipes that she had seen her mom make when there was an event in the family. It was French meat and manti. But if with the meat Kelly could still somehow manage, she doubted about the manti. The girl pulled the meat out of the refrigerator, peeled potatoes, nabbed tomatoes. The sauce was here, as was the cheese. All that was left was to assemble everything, put it on a baking tray, and wait for it to be ready. While the dish was cooking, Kelly went to her room, changed out of the refrigerator, got a bottle of wine, sat down at the table, and waited for her young man. Jacob returned. He saw Kelly doing something in the kitchen. He got curious. He went over there. When he saw what she was cooking, he was even more surprised. "Is it a holiday?" Did he ask her first? "No, I just wanted to make you happy, to sit together, to talk, so to speak, romance." She stood up and wanted to kiss him. "Where's Grandma?" he asked her, and also saw only 2 glasses on the table. But why? If we're celebrating something, why not the 3 of us? "I don't know." Kelly shrugged and turned away from the table as if it didn't concern her at all. She started slicing bread, spreading it out on a plate, so she wouldn't have to look the young man in the eye. She just wouldn't turn around. "I don't know how. We all live in the same apartment. Where could she have disappeared to?" He smirked. "I don't know. Go look in her room," Kelly muttered. She realized now that her plan wasn't as perfect as she thought. "Why are you telling me this? Grandma's coat is gone. Her shoes are gone too. Is she sitting there in her room with her clothes on looking at her? Look, why are you picking on me about your grandmother? I don't know where she is or what she might be. She went to a neighbor's house. Maybe somewhere else." Kelly was talking about. She was ready to burst into tears. "What do you mean she left?" Jacob asked her sternly. "How should I know? I was in the kitchen, and maybe she got dressed and went out." Kelly raised her voice. "She can't leave the house alone without you or me," he told her, and was starting to get nervous. "But Jacob," Kelly walked up to him and wanted to hug him. But the young man took her hands away. "Either you tell me the truth now, or I'll find out anyway." The young man looked at her with anger. "Yes," she said, "let's go to the store. I thought it wouldn't be a big deal if she went alone, so I let her go." Kelly made innocent eyes, and then she started to cry. "How could you let that happen? Where can we find her now?" Jacob realized that if something happened to his grandmother, his parents would not forgive him. And how will he look himself in the eyes after that? The guy quickly grabbed his jacket, got dressed, and went. It was very cold outside. He realized that his grandmother did not have such a warm coat, and she would not be able to stay outside for long. He drove to the very supermarket that they used to go to with her all the time. No matter how many times he ran around the store, asked the guards and clerks for people, no one had seen the small, unpleasant grandmother. No one could tell him anything now. Jacob had never been as worried about the grandmother before as he was now. He realized that the helpless old woman was alone in the city. She knew no one, and even if she did, she might not know where to go. It would be getting dark soon now, and where would she be at night? Jacob drove through the streets that were closest to the store where he assumed Grandma was, but never saw anyone. Jacob returned home. He was very angry. "How's it going? Any luck finding him? Did Kelly meet him?" "No," Jacob mumbled. "Let's go to my favorite. I made dinner for us. You don't seem to be having any trouble at all." I looked at her. "Oh, you'd think. You loved your grandmother so much that you're worried now." Puckered my lips. "Kelly, yeah, realize this is her apartment. Now my parents are gonna call and ask how Grandma's doing, and what am I gonna tell them?" He asked her that question again. "You won't say anything. You'll say she's asleep." The girl always had some excuse for everything. "You are a hardy man," Jacob told her. He looked at the girl and couldn't understand how she could be like that. "You'd think you'd better remember how you talked to her, what you said and what you did." She reminded him of his behavior. What did it matter now? What was already important? What was happening now? He turned on the kettle, poured himself some coffee, sat down at the table in the kitchen, and began to think about what he should do next. All night, the young man agonized without sleep. The next day in the morning, he went not to work, but to the police. He had to write a report on the disappearance of a man. "Hello." He went into one of the offices. "Come in." A man in a uniform was looking at him. "I want to write a missing persons report on my grandmother." The young man sat down on the table and stared absent-mindedly at the one sitting behind the desk. "Okay. Tell me in detail, what, when, and how," spoke the interlocutor and took a paper to write down. "I don't know what kind of illness she has, but she, if she leaves the house, then afterwards cannot remember where to return," Jacob muttered. "When did this happen?" asked the employee leading questions. "Yesterday afternoon," Jacob answered him, and he thought to himself that now he would be told that he had invented something and that he should wait. After a while, Grandma would come back, but he wasn't ready to back down. "So, here's some paper, write a statement. And if you have a picture, and we'll start looking," said the young man behind the desk. "Okay." Jacob wrote down everything he had learned yesterday from Kelly. After that, he pulled the photograph out of his pocket. Of course, it was not the first fresh, and the grandmother on it was even younger than she was now, but he had no other. They took all the documents from the boy, promised to call if anything came up, and now Jacob was on his way home again. "But how's it going?" Kelly asked him. "Is it going well? How's it going? How's it going? I'm not making any progress. And get away from me. I don't want to talk to you yet," he told her irritably, and he went to his room. He had to think again. "Jacob, I'm so sorry, please. I really didn't think it would be so serious," she answered, and again she made eyes and tried to hug the young man. "And what did you think? If she goes out into the yard and then cannot go into her driveway, now she will reach from the store to our house or what?" I didn't understand. I don't know what I was thinking at the time. I'm sick of your grandmother with what she does at home. Kelly was angry. This is her house. This is her apartment. She earned it. She bought it. She raised my father here. She and my mother lived here. And then me. At that moment, Jacob thought about it. But in fact, he had only seen his parents in pictures on video and heard their voices on the phone. But he had never seen them in real life. It made him feel bad. But now all his thoughts were occupied only with the fact that he had to find his grandmother. Only she was always there for him. She forgave all faults, was always ready to support, and most importantly loved him. And what if those to whom he applied quickly find out everything and find her? But she couldn't have gotten far. And the city here is not very big. The girl answered calmly. And if something happened to her? What if she's cold? How long has it been? And she's in such light clothes. Maybe she was hit by a car, and now she's lying in some morgue. He stopped, didn't he? He went to the stores, looked for her around town. But he didn't call any hospitals or morgues or anything to ask if they'd received a woman like that. The guy immediately grabbed the phone and began to call all these instances, but his grandmother was nowhere to be found. Tonight he went to bed because he realized that fatigue had come over him so much that tomorrow he would not be able to do anything. At night, the young man had various nightmares. He woke up several times in a cold sweat. Kelly was sleeping peacefully next to him. "And how can you sleep peacefully?" he said to her aloud. But the girl only rolled over to the other side and kept sniffling. Further in the morning, also no news, just silence. Then Jacob himself called the local office and found out how the case of finding his grandmother was progressing. "We're doing everything we can." That was the only answer he heard. This did not satisfy him very much. So Jacob started looking into trying to find his grandmother on his own. And Nancy, when she left the store, walked down the sidewalk. The woman thought she should at least recognize her house or yard. At some point, it seemed to the woman that she recognized the area, that perhaps it was her yard. She went there, went to one of the entrances, and sat down on a bench. There were some people here. Nancy sat and watched them, thinking that maybe if she didn't recognize the people, they would recognize her and someone would come up. But no one did. They all walked past. It was getting dark. She got up and went to another yard. And this house seemed familiar to her. She sat down on the bench again. It was getting very cold in the evening. The woman laid down. She wanted to go somewhere else, but at that moment such a strong wind blew. A blizzard was beginning. Nancy looked around, and she could think of nothing but to go into the entryway. The woman went in there, stood there while stomping her feet, because it was not so warm here either. And suddenly, the door opened and a little boy ran in. "Grandma, what are you doing here?" Looked at her surprised. "Hi, what's your name?" She leaned toward him. "Mason," he told her. He saw that she was so cold she couldn't even speak clearly. Her lips were blue. She couldn't get a tooth on a tooth. "I'm Nancy." She smiled. "Why are you standing here?" He was curious. "Why are you running so late? Look what's going on outside." She wagged her finger at him. "I went to buy bread." He showed her a bag with a loaf of bread in it. "Where's your mom? You can't let a little boy like that go shopping for bread, can you?" She stood there and told him off. "My mom is sick," he said. "She's sick." "That's too bad." Nancy grinned. She looked at the door of the entryway. Behind it, she could hear the wind howling outside. She stood there remembering what this boy's name was. Who was he anyway? "Nancy, don't you have a home?" the boy asked at the same time. "No, it's somewhere, but I don't know where." She was almost crying. "Come and visit us." He held out his hand to her. "Can we?" she asked him. "Why not? You'll freeze and die here." He answered her. Nancy grinned, but followed the boy because she had no other choice. She entered the apartment. The place smelled strongly of medicine. It was like something popped into Nancy's head and she remembered. But what did she remember? She didn't know. Couldn't get a grip on the thoughts that were flying through her head very quickly. "Come on, let's go through." The boy saw how cold the grandmother was. They came with her into the kitchen. He immediately put the kettle on the stove, poured her hot tea, and only then ran into the room to his mother. "Mom, do we have guests?" he said to the woman. "What guests?" She didn't understand. At certain moments, she began to cough very badly. And for some reason it was then that Nancy felt good and happy. Some memory lived in her, but she couldn't remember it. "Nancy, have you had your tea?" Jacob asked her. Did she look at him when he approached her? "No, I'm Mason," he told her. "Mason." Again the woman looked at him with empty eyes. He took her hand and led her into his mom's room. "Here, Mom, meet Nancy. There's a very bad snowstorm outside. And she's a thin little boy, all she could do. And I decided, so she wouldn't die, to take her home," he said. "Hello, come in." The woman coughed again. "Hello." It's like she didn't realize what she was doing here. And why had she come here? She saw a thermometer on the table, some pills. She went over, took the thermometer, and slipped it under the woman's arm. "What are you doing?" She didn't understand. "We're going to change the temperature, and then it'll be clear," she said. It was like a doctor talking. "Nancy, this is my mom, Lisa," said the boy. Yes, your mom will be fine now," said the woman. Lisa realized at that moment that there was something wrong with their guest. "Is your name Nancy?" she asked her. "Yes, Nancy," the woman said. "Tell me, has something happened to you?" Lisa asked quietly, because if she raised her voice, she would immediately start coughing. "I don't know what happened to me. I sat down on a stool." "Mason, why don't you go look in Grandma's pocket? Maybe there's something in there," his mom asked him. Mason went and looked, but there was nothing there. When he entered the room, the woman blossomed into a smile, wiped her hands for a hug. Jacob said to Nancy again, "What do you think I am, Jacob?" "I'm Mason, for the 10th time I'm telling you." The boy couldn't understand what was happening to her. "Nancy, are you lost?" Lisa asked her a question. She'd heard stories of old people losing their memory, leaving their house, and then not knowing where they were going. "Yeah, I can't find my house." Nancy put his head down. "All right, I see. You can stay with us as long as you want. You still have relatives, and someone's gonna put out a BOLO. They'll find you. And if you move around, it's gonna be hard enough," Lisa told her. After that, she thought she should call the local police station to let them know she had a grandmother. "What happened to you?" Nancy asked her, even though she realized that in a few minutes she would forget everything she was going to be told here. "As my son has already told you, my name is Lisa. I used to have a good life. I had a happy family. I was in high school, and I met a young guy. He seemed very nice. Then I went to school. He went to the army. Wires, tears. He didn't believe me that I could wait. But I was not like that. And of course I waited, wrote letters. He came back, proposed to me." Lisa began to tell the story. At this time, Mason sat on his mother's lap. He had never heard the whole story before. Some of it he knew, some of it he guessed. But he had never heard his mother tell it like this. Lisa drained a little for now, then took in a lungful of air to continue her story. She realized that this was eating her up inside. And now to this strange woman, who yet remembered nothing, she could open up and tell what had happened to her. "But Mom, what happened next?" her son asked her. "And when he proposed to me, everything was so romantic. My parents didn't want to let me leave my native village, but my husband wanted to, and we left with him to work in the city. They gave us an apartment." Lisa continued talking. She was silent for a short while because she needed to catch her breath. At that moment, the woman lay back on the pillow and looked at the ceiling. It was obvious that she was having a very hard time, and that the husband had turned out to be a scoundrel. Asked her Nancy, who tried to get into the gist of the conversation, but could do nothing. "No. Then I found out I was pregnant. We were both overjoyed at the news. Our beloved daughter was born. We seem to have a complete good family now. Everything's great. We had an apartment, a job. What more to look forward to, if everything was?" She stopped talking again. Lisa, and then she started coughing. So both Nancy and Mason freaked out. The boy ran into the kitchen, got a glass of water. He stirred something up, lifted his mother up, and gave her a drink. "Wow, you have such a little boy, and already you have to do so much," the woman said. "Yes, because there is no one else to help but him." Lisa didn't agree. She was breathing hard now, and it seemed as if she wouldn't say anything more. "Mom, will you continue?" Her son asked her. "Yes, if you are interested, of course I am." Mason sat up and stared with all eyes. "And then I don't know what happened in our lives. While I was on maternity leave, my husband started coming home on time less and less, and when he did, he made all kinds of excuses. He was at a friend's house, or someone had an emergency. He helped, and then went to a neighboring town to meet his classmates. Even though he'd always studied and lived in this town, I tried to believe him, but at some point it became impossible. He didn't come home for the night on the second day and on the third. And when he came back, I asked him directly about the other woman, and he didn't deny anything. He had indeed had her." Nancy noticed tears running from Lisa's eyes, and now she remembered something too. The same feelings she had had. But when and with whom? Unfortunately, she couldn't remember that. "Yes, it had happened," the woman said briskly. "No, nothing happened then. I decided not to do anything and just let it go. I know the forbidden fruit is sweet, and if you're allowed to do everything, you won't go anywhere." And so it was. We were gone for a few days, and then he came home. Lisa smiled. That he just knocked on the door, came in. Nancy wondered. Just like that. After that, there were apologies and gifts and flowers and all that. Until the daughter turned 12, Lisa went silent again. What happened then? Now Mason was already asking questions because it was also his father, whom he had never seen. He was gone again, this time for good. No matter how many times I called or wrote, he did not answer, did not get in touch. It was just me and my daughter. Before that, I was cut down at work, and I have been sitting at home for a year. I could not find any work. My husband brought some money, but it was not enough for anything. A couple of months after he was gone from our house, I realized I was expecting a second child. Lisa exhaled. There was a whooshing sound coming from her chest. That was me. Asked Mason, who was listening intently to every word. Yes, baby, it was you. Confirmed his mother. And then what happened? And then the worst happened. My daughter demanded that I had an abortion, that we didn't need a child from that man, and we didn't have any money to raise her. I didn't work anywhere. No one would take me if I was pregnant. You have no idea what my daughter screamed at me. She thought that if she had nothing now, then later, when the little child was born, all the attention and purchases would be for him, and she would be left with nothing. A cough began to choke, and so the story had to be interrupted again. Nancy sat staring at one point. She understood how Lisa felt in those moments, but how did she understand it? Right now, it seemed to her that the woman was telling her story, not her own. Well, it's getting late. Let's go to bed. I'll continue the story tomorrow, Lisa said. Again, the coughing began to choke her. Mason stirred something in her glass again. She sipped a little, but it didn't help her this time. Nancy didn't bother to argue. Mason showed her where to lie down, and she shot herself up on the couch and lay down. During the night, she dreamed about something, some people, and she didn't recognize any of them. They were all going somewhere, saying something, doing something to her. In the morning, she woke up. She felt very bad. Her head hurt. Her blood pressure was high. She needed pills, but she didn't know where to get them. Mason, come here. Nancy called out to him. What do you want? He ran up to her. Do you have a first aid kit? She asked him. Yes, a boy ran into the other room and brought back a whole box of pills and various jars. She started looking at the pills and smirked, realized to herself that she didn't know which pill she should choose. This really annoyed the woman because she knew how annoying all this could get to people, Go ask my mom what pill I should take, she asked him. In a few minutes, the boy returned with some pills in his hands. Nancy drank one. After that, she ran a little. She felt better. She got up and went to the room where Lisa was lying. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." Lisa lay like that. Nancy helped her up. They went to the bathroom, then to the bathtub. Lisa even tried to sit with them in the kitchen, but so far it was very difficult for the woman. Nancy went and found groceries in the refrigerator and made breakfast. At this point, she asked Mason for a pen and paper and wrote down everything she did yesterday. What's the boy running around next to her? His name is Mason. That's why she didn't mix him up today. After breakfast, they all gathered in Nancy's room. I wondered why the boy was home and not going out. Because I don't have the ability to pay for kindergarten and everything that goes with it. The woman said, "Mom, come on, tell the story further," asked her son. "What is there to tell?" The pregnancy went normally. The daughter was completely out of hand. She started doing everything out of spite. Going out, taking someone home. Lisa cried again and waited for him to come into the world. When I was 6 months pregnant, I was admitted to the hospital, and when they took all the tests, the doctor saw that there was something wrong with my body. I couldn't do anything because I could hurt the baby. So I waited, feeling like I was getting worse and worse. And when Mason was born, I had an MRI. Turns out I had some kind of tumor in my larynx. I needed emergency surgery. I had to leave the baby with my big sister and go to the hospital. I heard all kinds of things from my eldest daughter, but I needed to be healthy to raise my second child. The surgery was done, and afterwards I felt very well. I went everywhere with Mason, spent all my time with him. And then I got another infection. I had a slight fever for a long time, and they put me back in the hospital. By now, Lisa was just crying. "Mommy, calm down, please," her son hugged her. At some point, the eldest daughter found a young man and said that she was going to live with him. That she didn't want to know us at all. She warned me not to give birth, but I didn't listen to her. And so now she was very angry with me and just left the house. Lisa continued to say, "But then, what happened to you after the hospital?" Nancy just asked that's what she wanted to know. And then they told me that the tumor had come back and I was doing badly. They said I had nothing left to live for. Just nothing. Lisa cried and looked at Mason again. Mommy then sobbed in Mason's voice. Lisa cried with him. Even Nancy couldn't help herself at that. "Okay. That's it. Enough of the dampness here." Up she got. She waved away her tears and headed for the kitchen. "Can I help you?" the boy asked her. "Of course," she replied. Together, they began to peel vegetables, cut potatoes, cabbage, all to boil borscht. "Oh, how nice. I haven't had real borscht for a long time," the boy said. "And you've actually eaten it. You're too young for such soup." Nancy smiled softly. "I have. Mom used to make it," he said. After that, they were in the kitchen for a long time, waited until everything was boiling, closed the lid. The soup took place for a while. Then Nancy poured it on plates, all that was ready. "My God, it's delicious. You have golden hands." Lisa looked at her, just because she wanted to call the station and tell them that Grandma was at their house. She'd forgotten all about it. "What about your daughter? Do you have no contact with her at all?" did Nancy ask her when she came in. For some reason, that was the memory that came to her mind now. "Not at all," Lisa admitted to her. "I see," agreed Nancy. Today was the end of her second day living in this apartment. She realized that she probably had someone, and maybe even someone looking for her. But who was it? And how to find them? She had absolutely no idea. Mason was small. Lisa couldn't. So tonight, she went to bed thinking only about whether or not she had relatives. "Lisa, do you mind if I stay a little longer?" Nancy came in the next day. "Do you?" "Of course you do. You're doing us such a favor. You made a nice borscht yesterday, didn't you?" Lisa smiled. Nancy lived in the apartment now. She did a lot of things around the house, cooking, studying. She was enjoying it very much. "Grandma, why don't you and I play a game?" a boy asked her. When she heard that word, she wanted to latch on again to some thought that had flashed through her mind, but she couldn't. "I think I have a grandson too," she said to the boy, "so we should definitely find him." He told her, "Yes, I understand that you must, but I don't know how to do it," sighed Nancy. The woman didn't know why, but she liked sitting next to Lisa. She'd tell her things. They'd listen to each other. When Nancy had to turn the woman over, she could do it herself. But her strength was so low, she couldn't do anything. One day Lisa had to get an injection. She usually did it herself, but now she asked Nancy to give her an injection in her buttock, because in her leg where she had injected herself, there wasn't a live spot there anymore. It was all bagged up. Nancy came over, took the syringe, drew the medicine, tapped the needle professionally, made sure there was no air left. "Did she inject it like that? I didn't even feel it." "You weren't a medic before, by any chance?" Lisa asked her. "I don't know," said Nancy. "I see. I wish I knew something about you," Lisa said regretfully. Another week passed. It was clear that Nancy herself would not remember anything. She had to be taken to a doctor or something, but who would do it was unclear. Mason only knew where the store was, which was located on the corner of the house. There was no way Grandma could have gotten there on her own. And Lisa couldn't help her, so they all stayed in the same apartment. "Stay with us forever," the boy told her. "But if nobody finds me and nothing happens, then I will have to stay with you," she said and laughed. During this time, she had gotten used to people, and they to her too. Nancy did everything right in the house, never forgetting anything. She had everything signed everywhere, where everything was, what to take, what pills to take, what to put in Lisa's room, and so on. She didn't even think of going out, because she was afraid that she wouldn't find the apartment. Then there was no telling what she would do next. This morning Nancy woke up out of habit and went to the kitchen to make breakfast for herself and Lisa. For drinking, she opened the refrigerator, took out the eggs, and decided to fry the pieces into cups. She diluted the milk with the eggs. After that, she cut the bread into quarter wall pieces. Then she tortured all the slices in the mixture. She poured oil on the skillet. Then she took the pieces out one by one and threw them in. It was delicious. It smelled good. Mason came running in. "Nancy, what are you cooking?" he asked her. "You'll see for yourself." She was already making tea in mugs and putting everything on the table. "Oh, it smells so good. I can't wait any longer," the child said. "Mason, you don't go to kindergarten, but you're going to school," a woman asked him once. "Of course I'm going to school. I already know all the letters and I can count to 20. He told her. "Oh, that's good." In the evening, the woman sat at the table with him. She knew that in the evening she might forget everything. So she took out her notebook and wrote down in it that later she should see what Mason could do. After that, they went to the room. Kolya treated her to breakfast too. "Could you make me some coffee with milk?" she asked the woman then. "Of course. This is the smallest thing I could do for you." Nancy went quickly to the kitchen so she wouldn't forget anything. After that, she did everything that the lady of the house asked of her, brought it to her. "Thank you so much. I've wanted to do this for so long, but Mason didn't make me do it, and I'm so busy," said Lisa quietly. She and Mason were sitting in the room when they heard Lisa start to cough. "I'm going to dilute her syrup now." "Cups," Mason mouthed and ran to the kitchen to get water. "Good." Nancy went to the woman's room. She lifted and head sat comfortably in the bed. Mason at this time brought a glass of water. He added some sort of syrup to it, as he did the rest of the day, and handed it to Mom. It made her breathe easier, but it still didn't make her feel any better. When Nancy saw that Lisa had her eyes closed, she thought she was going to sleep. So she and Mason went into the other room. "Remember you promised me you'd show me what you could do?" Nancy asked him again. "Sure. The boy took out the big alphabet book he had and started showing the woman the letters he already knew, then did the same with the numbers. Nancy could see that this child was truly developed. She only wondered who was practicing with him. That's what I decided to ask him. No one tutored me. I did it on my own, till the batteries ran out. He showed me the alphabet book that had batteries on the back, and when you pressed a letter, it would spell it out. Wow, what a good boy you are, Nancy complimented him. She was so used to this family that she didn't think she'd ever lived anywhere else. It seemed to her that she had always been here. Vidya was like a grandson to her. Every day she took him to the store, forced him, gave him money, and the boy ran. He wasn't used to it. Sometimes Nancy would sit in the kitchen until something rattled or rumbled in the next room. Then she would flinch and remember that she wasn't here alone, that there was someone else. Nancy, Mom's not feeling well again. Mason came to see her this morning. He was almost crying. The woman could see how hard it was for that boy to live. She realized that he was still so young and had taken on such a big responsibility. They were going back into the room to help Lisa again. Today Nancy saw that the woman was not well at all. She was breathing so hard that it was frightening for her health. After Lisa was feeling better, Nancy decided not to leave her side. She remained sitting in that room. Mason said he was very tired and went to get some sleep. Glory sat up. She was already dozing off in the chair. The woman saw some people in her dream again. They were saying something to her. A young woman threatened her with her finger. But who was it? She didn't understand at all. Nancy heard Mason screaming and opened her eyes. "Nancy, look, I'm bad for Mom," he said to her. At that moment, Nancy looked at Lisa and saw that she was not only coughing, but as if she was choking. "Mason, quickly call an ambulance," the woman shouted. Mason ran to the phone. It was something he had to do more than once. He dialed the number of the ambulance, said his mom wasn't feeling well, dictated the address. They told him the doctors would be there soon. What to do? He ran around the room, afraid that his mom was going to die. That was the worst thing for the boy. He often thought about it. He even had scary dreams, but he tried to distract himself. As usual, the boy ran to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, added the medicine to it, and they tried to pour it into Lisa's mouth. But it didn't work. "Mason, do you have any medical instruments at home?" Nancy asked him. What exactly was the boy looking at her for? He didn't know what she was talking about. At that moment, Nancy got up from her chair. She took some alcohol from the nightstand and began to disinfect her hands and vomit on them. "Nancy, what are you doing?" The boy looked at her. "Say, do you have any tools at home? Syringes, a scalpel, or anything like that?" The woman spoke quickly. Nancy did not recognize herself. How did she know such words? And why did she need all this stuff anyway? The boy ran out into the hallway. He had brought some sort of suitcase. When Nancy opened it, she was very surprised. It was a set of surgical instruments. She quickly put on gloves, picked up a scalpel, and started touching Lisa's neck. "Nancy, what are you doing?" The boy was very frightened. "So be quiet and come help me," she muttered. Nancy rubbed the alcohol on Lisa's neck. She went lower, to the chest, felt everything with her fingers, and turned to the boy Mason. "Have you ever had them put an IV in your mom?" she asked him. Lisa was already rolling her eyes at this point. She was almost completely white. I don't know who the boy was and sat down on the floor. "Now is not the time to be crying. Quickly look for the non-tube that you screw onto the needle when you put in an IV." Nancy said knowingly. "Where do we find it?" "I don't know," hummed the boy. He was really scared. "Now, Mason, this is no time to be drooling. Let's do this." She looked in the nightstand herself. There was nothing there. Then she told the boy to get a regular pen. He had brought one and was now standing beside his mom, watching Nancy wanting to make a cut right into her. "Please don't, for she will die," shouted the boy to her. "So shut up and hold it there." Did she show him where to put his finger? Mason did as the woman said. She wiped the case, the handles with alcohol, and then quickly did something else at the address and inserted the handle. And at that moment, Lisa sighed. No sooner had they done all this than they heard a knock on the door. Mason ran to open it. There were medics standing on the threshold. They entered, saw a woman lying on the bed with a pen sticking out of her throat. "Who did this?" asked one of the men in a very stern voice. Nancy at that moment felt bad that she was suddenly drawn to help. "It's Nancy," Mason responded immediately. The nurse, turning to the woman, held out his hand to her, and when Nancy put hers into his, he shook it firmly. "Woman, did you work as a doctor?" he asked her. "I don't know," replied Nancy. She was sitting back in her chair now, her hands shaking. She knew she had done the right thing, but how did she know that? Nancy had no recollection at all. When the others came in and brought the stretcher with them, they all looked at Nancy respectfully, and when Lisa was already being carried into the ambulance, the one who had come in first looked at Nancy again. "You did the right thing. If it hadn't been for you, she wouldn't have lived to see us," he told her. "Good." The doors closed. The boy and his grandmother were left alone in the apartment. "How did you know all this?" The boy clung to her. "Mason, and if I had known," cried Nancy. She realized that without proper education, she could not have done any of this, and she probably had it. Today they cleaned up Lisa's room, and the next day they went to see her at the hospital first thing in the morning. The woman was very afraid to leave the house, so she asked Mason for the number of a cab. He quickly went to the neighbor's house and found out. After that, he and Nancy called a car, and now he was to take them exactly to the address. Lisa was lying in bed from her throat already showing fears from home. Nancy smiled at her. Nancy was approached by some woman. Yes, she turned to her and looked at her with a blank stare. "Don't you recognize me?" The nurse smiled. "You know, my grandmother has some kind of disease. She forgets things all the time," said Mason to the one who approached. "So come with me." They left the boy in the room with his mother and walked down the hall. Now Nancy was sitting near some office, waiting for the girl who had greeted her to come out. Not a few minutes later, a man came out of the office. He looked solid and looked at the one who was sitting in the hallway. "Nancy, hello. Why didn't you go to the hospital? When did this happen to you?" He came up to her, took her hands. "I don't know what happened to me." She looked at him. "What about your relatives? Why didn't they do anything?" The man didn't understand. "Don't ask me anything because I can't answer you." She lowered her head and cried. "All right, let's go and have a look at you." He took her to some office. Everyone recognized her. Everyone knew her by name and patronymic. The woman had some MRI procedures, tests, and everything else. And Nancy didn't talk to anyone. She just kept quiet because she didn't recognize anyone who was here. When it was over, the head doctor of the hospital ordered that Nancy be assigned a private room and put her there. "No, I can't leave Mason alone." The woman turned to them. "Don't worry, we'll take care of him," said the man who had met her first. And indeed, there was another bed next to Lisa's, where Mason could sit. The woman needed surgery, so he could be near his mother now. And the boys also showed him where Nancy's room was, so he could go to her too. The head doctor went to his office. He decided that if Nancy wasn't with her relatives, which is possible, they might not know where she was at all. He dialed the woman's home number. "Hello," he heard in the receiver. "Hello. This is James, the head doctor of the hospital where Nancy used to work." He introduced himself. "Hello." On the other end, the young man's voice trembled. "Jacob, I believe it was you who guessed." "A man?" "Yes. Is there something you want to tell me about my grandmother?" he asked, because he wanted to. "Yes, she's in our hospital right now. And if you want, you can come and see her," he said. To him sternly. "Yes, we'll be there right away," he said. "At home." Jacob hung up the phone. He turned to the men. "What happened?" she asked. She had always wondered who the young man was socializing with and what he was doing. But he was hiding everything. "I think we found the grandmother," he answered. But at the same time he smiled. "Who called you?" Kelly jumped up from her seat. Ever since Grandma had been lost, the young people had hardly spoken to each other. Jacob was so resentful of his position that he could not talk to her yet. "So I'll tell you all about it on the way. For now, quickly pack. Take everything you need. We need to find slippers, a robe, some underwear, and take it all to her. She's alone in the hospital. She has no one." Jacob was talking fast. Kelly did as he told her. They got in the car and drove off. In just a short while they were there, Jacob ran down the steps. He couldn't believe it had really happened. And Grandma would be home again now. He promised himself that he would never do to her again what he had done before. James was already waiting for him. "Hello again. Can you tell me where my grandmother is?" he asked. "She's in room 9, the man said. "Really?" For some reason he despised Jacob. It seemed to him that everything that was happening now was because of him. Jacob and Kelly walked quickly down the hall. He saw room number 9 at the top of the hall. He knocked and opened the door. "Grandma, hi," he said quietly, seeing that the woman was awake. "Who are you?" she asked them as they entered. "Grandma, this is me, Jacob. And this is Kelly, my girlfriend," he told her. "Jacob, you're so small." She couldn't believe her eyes. "Yes, Grandma. I'll always be little to you. I'm sorry." He knelt beside her bed. Nancy was lying on the bed. She was looking at the ceiling and crying at that moment. "Why are you crying?" Kelly asked her. "Imagine, you're walking around. Everyone recognizes you, saying hello, talking about something, and you don't remember or know anyone." She wiped her eyes with a towel that was lying there. "Don't worry, everything will be fine," Vita replied. After that, they started coming to the woman every day, bringing something, talking. Nancy already recognized them, but sometimes she still had to remind her who came to her. After a week, Mason came running into her room and told her that her mom had had surgery and was doing much better than she had before. They went into Lisa's room together. She was Mason herself. Yes, and Nancy were all happy because it had turned out this way, and not any other way. That's when James came in. "Nancy, I got a message from the ER that you did everything you could to keep that woman alive," looking at her and smiling. "Yes, that's what they said," confirmed what Mason said. "And how did you manage that with your illness?" The head doctor wondered then. "I don't know. But the moment I saw her eyes roll back and she went practically white, she stopped breathing. It was like my brain shut down and my hands started doing everything." The woman was telling him. "Yeah, it's true what they say. It's like riding a bike. Once you learn how to ride a bicycle, you can do it all your life." James smiled. He walked over to Nancy, put his arm around her shoulders, and "There are visitors again," he said to her. "Jacob," the woman said. She already remembered him and knew him. "Yes, your grandson and his fiancée," James said. "Oh, then I must go to them." She looked at Lisa. She blinked in agreement. When she went out into the hallway, she saw Jacob and Kelly sitting outside her room. "Grandma, what are you doing there?" Jacob asked her. He was getting worried again. "A very good friend of mine is lying here. I lived with her until I didn't know who I was, where I was, and where I should go," she confessed to him. "All right, let's go and talk, and then we'll go to your acquaintance and thank her for doing everything for you," said her grandson to her. They went into the woman's room, laid out everything they had brought, and Jacob told her the most welcome news of all, perhaps the one Nancy had been waiting for all these years. "I called my parents yesterday, and they said they're coming to visit us in 2 weeks. He muttered to her. Jacob didn't have the breath to utter it. That's why he was interrupting. God, what happiness! Nancy clapped her hands, though she couldn't even remember her son's face, but it didn't matter now. The main thing was that they came, and everything else could be left for later. Well, let's go meet your acquaintance, Jacob said to her, and they went to the room where Lisa was lying. When they got there, Kelly just froze at the door. Why come in? Jacob told her. It was the first time he had seen his girlfriend afraid or shy. I can't, she answered, and turned away. She seemed to want to get out. Why? He didn't understand. Because it's my mom, Kelly told him. She was surprised herself. It was impossible to even find the words. Like what? Mason jumped up from his seat. Kelly, you're the one. He couldn't believe his eyes. Mason looked at her brother and could not believe that he was already so big. Lisa opened her eyes, and in that instant she cried. It had been so many years since she had seen her daughter to meet her now. Mommy, what's wrong? Kelly came up to her. She didn't know what to do, and she was afraid that she'd just gotten out of surgery. What if it hurts? Daughter, please forgive me for everything, she exhaled. They hugged. I have nothing to forgive you for. They both cried, because it's not every day that situations like this happen. Wow, Jacob looked at that hug. What are you so surprised about? Nancy turned to him. How could it be that your mother was the one who got my grandmother after you took her to the store? Said the young man. They were all sitting in Lisa's room. Mason climbed onto his sister's lap. That's when James walked in. Oh, I see you two have already bonded, he said to them. That's the word. And they told him who was who. Wow, that's fate, he said, but you don't know the most important thing. Your grandmother probably didn't tell you that. Not only did she live with Lisa, but she saved her life, the man said. What do you mean? Nancy doesn't remember anything. Kelly didn't realize at that moment. That's it. If it hadn't been for your grandmother, you would never have met your mom again, the doctor said. A month later, Charles and Miranda arrived as promised. When they entered Nancy's house, they immediately started hugging her. Who are you? She looked at her son with surprise. Mom, why don't you recognize me? Charles kissed her on both cheeks. Tears ran down her cheeks. Son, she said, as if trying to guess who had come to see her. Yes, I'm sorry for all the times I didn't come. For leaving you with this dummy. She looked at Jacob. Nancy, am I glad to see you? Miranda hugged her. The woman looked at her as if she were a specimen in a museum. Charles and Jacob went to see James the next day. They wanted to know what to do about the mother. You know, guys, this process, if it starts, you can only maintain the condition. You have to live with it. If it is a mild stage, which I think she is now, then she will remember in places, talk and do. But if it goes to severe, then brace yourself, and your mom and grandmother's heart is strong. So don't get your hopes up. He fell silent because there was a knock on the door. It was Kelly. She was very surprised to see her young man here. What are you doing here? He came up to her and said in a whisper, Wait, I need to talk to James. She looked at the man. Yeah, come on in. I'm listening. I hope you don't have any secrets from each other, said the man. I'm not the only one. Kelly wheeled her mother into the study. Mason walked in as well. I think you're on the same subject as we are. Lisa looked at Jacob. We're about Grandma, he told her, and I'm about her. You see, what happened to her is terrible, of course. But imagine the body's abilities, what it can do when it's in shock, Lisa said. It was quiet now, almost a whisper, but everyone could hear her well. And what was James looking at her for? I would like Nancy to continue living with us. She's used to us in the house, knows everything. Mason thinks of her as a grandmother. She turned to Charles. But that's up to you, the doctor shrugged. All right. Now that all the medications have been administered, we should all get together, Charles said. They went back to the house. Lisa and Mason were with him. They ran through to Nancy what they had just said in the doctor's office. She smiled and hugged Mason. Well, Mom, what will your choice be? Charles looked at her. Of course I will move, since they have become like family to me. And Jacob will salt and let them stay here. The woman cried. The son put everyone in the car. He drove his mother to the place where she was to live. After that, he got out of the car and helped the mother to get out. They went up to the floor, entered the apartment. "This place could use some repairs," the man said. "Will you do it?" The mother asked him. "And if I hire workers and buy the materials, you are very offended at me." He looked into the eyes of the one who had once put her whole life into raising him. His mother looked at him once. He took her by the shoulders. "I'm kidding. How could I forget you? You're the dearest and dearest thing in my life. I just have to show up more often, or she'll forget." Nancy smiled. "I've already thought of that." Charles stopped talking. "Well, it's okay," they hugged. And then, while the parents were here, Kelly invited Jacob over to her mother's house, where his grandmother was as well. Charles and Miranda drove up as well. There the young man was getting ready to propose. "Just please be happy," the grandmother said. "How are we?" Miranda smiled and kissed her husband. "No, you shouldn't leave your children behind either," he threatened. Charles fingered the future boyfriend of the newlyweds. "It's gonna be okay." Kelly was hugging her mother at that moment. She didn't understand how she could have left her then. And most importantly, she hadn't thought about it for so many years. She felt the same way she did now. When did Grandma get lost? The young went to the registry office. There they wrote everything they wanted. They were to be married in a month. How good it is to be young and happy. Nancy said, "Grandma, don't be sad." Jacob came up to her. The groom's father had bought him and the bride fancy wedding suits. No one was mad at anyone. Basically, everyone was to blame for what happened. Now everyone has forgiven each other. No one held a grudge. Do you agree? Did the woman at the front desk speak? Yes, Kelly did. Yes. Jacob looked at her. They congratulated each other with a kiss, and then twirled in the first wedding dance. "Your grandmother will soon be a great-grandmother." You whispered in Kelly Jacob's ear. "Were you seriously looking at your favorite? You think it's something to joke about?" She leaned away from him and looked into his eyes. "How long have you two been dancing?" Charles approached them. "It's okay," Jacob answered him. They went to the restaurant. While they were talking, the groom came up to the grandmother and kissed her. "Who are you?" Nancy looked at him. "Hi." He realized she was joking with him. The woman had gotten used to it lately. She squeezed his hand and kissed it. "I wish you well." Tears rolled from her eyes. "I have an announcement to make." Getting up from his seat at last, "We are listening to you," his father told him. "There's a new addition to our family, and my grandmother will change her status, as will you and my parents." He looked over to where Nancy was sitting. "Thank you." She sent him a kiss. Subscribe and click the bell. Now, Miranda, tell me, what is the subject and what is the predicate in this sentence? "Come on, you clever girl, you'll do well," Lisa asked the girl, who had been sitting on the table for half an hour and could not make any progress. On the kitchen floor and wall, the afternoon sun was drawing shining, boring squares. It was summer in the midst of that marvelous pairing when the existence of other seasons can be forgotten. The girl was absent-minded, tired. However, with a stepfather like that, it was no wonder the child was nervous all day long. "It's stuffy. I'll open the window," said Lisa, and got up and went to the window. In general, in this one room, where she worked as a tutor, for 3 years already helps the daughter of her best friend with Russian language. It had always been stuffy and dirty and dingy, ever since Miranda Kelly's mom came down with an illness that the doctors had only flailed their arms against, saying to look for money and those who would even take it on. Or better yet, accept it. The case is hopeless. It left the house in a bad way. Lisa and Kelly became friends by chance. They both went to the skating rink one winter, alone, with no idea what to do. What was the right thing to do or how to do it? They went out on the ice, laughing, holding hands. Didn't get crucified. Then it was coffee and pies at a little kiosk here at the rink that they got to talking and found out they had a lot in common. Both were fans of old jazz, hated onions. There were larks in every dish and even, it turns out, lived in neighboring yards. But there were some natural and cool differences between them. Lisa was 3 years older than her newly minted 18-year-old friend. Lisa was from a full, one might say, intelligent family with a mom, a math teacher, a grandmother, a vice principal, and a dad, an art history teacher at the university. Kelly stepped into adulthood from an orphanage and had just gotten an apartment. At times, Kelly felt incredibly lonely because of the way some people treated her due to her background, hurtful and offensive inductions. Unfortunately, even Lisa's family found such people, but she stood up to defend her friend with a mountain and said that she had had enough of giving in to her loved ones and agreed to enter the faculty of philology to devote her life to the Russian language, giving up her dream of becoming a tax collector. That's how Lisa finally defended her right to friendship. She, by the way, supported Kelly in the fact that studying for her is a good choice. There would always be a job. The girls kept no secrets from each other, except for one dark, literally life-altering one. Kelly must and after. Then, 9 years ago, there had been a romance in her life as deafeningly exciting as possible for a first love. He was masculine, strong, bold. Absolutely no match for Kelly, according to her best friend. "I'm sorry, but he's not your daddy," Lisa had said bluntly to Lisa that fateful evening when Kelly had been twirling in front of the mirror, fixing her hair and assessing whether she looked good in a little black dress and a string of pearls, albeit artificial, around her neck. "He loves me and I love him," Lisa replied. I rolled my eyes, because this is not an argument for building a serious relationship. Her friend was like a spell. "He's a bad man from a rich family. But that's just a facade. What's he really like? Do you know what people say about him?" Kelly only shrugged her shoulders. She smiled like a fool and kissed her best friend on the cheek, wishing her good luck goodbye. "He's probably going to propose to me tonight." Ran off on a date that destroyed. Because the next morning, Cindy, as her closest contact, got a call from the hospital. Kelly was in intensive care with severe injuries sustained in a mundane accident. The doctor explained to Cindy that her friend had been beaten and thrown full speed out of a car. Serious injuries touched her entire body. And worst of all, her spine had been hit in particular. They said to prepare for the worst, that she'd be crippled. Except Kelly made an amazingly speedy recovery. But they never found her abuser. He managed to get away, literally fled the country. And then it turned out that Kelly was pregnant, and the doctors unanimously said they had to terminate the pregnancy on the background of traumatic injuries can lead to catastrophic consequences. "It's my baby," Kelly replied, when Lisa, along with doctors, came to convince her to choose herself about her health future. "It's a girl, I can feel it, and she's mine, you hear? I'm her mom. And we're going to be okay." And then, after asking to be left with her friend, Kelly forced Lisa to swear that no one would ever know the truth about who the baby's father was. That this is the monster who did this to her, throwing her literally out of her life when she became unwanted. When love was played out, when Kelly was discharged from the hospital, it seemed at first that life was slowly getting back on track. Acquaintances in the shop supported financially. Get well for now. Then, before the birth, still managed to work. And finally, the baby was born. A girl. Lisa asked Kelly to help pick out a name, and they decided she'd be a car. After all, it's an ancient, beautiful, and magical name. Lifting the baby, of course, was very hard. But Kelly was not discouraged. She worked as soon as she could snatch the opportunity of her mother's new everyday schedule. And even when the car turned 4 years old, she met a man named Charles. True, in Lisa's opinion, it was again a bad lot 10 years older with no living space of his own. Came from a village where the whole family drank. But Kelly said he's a real man who works as a laborer, and the baby needs a father. And then, when it already seemed, well, life is more or less formed, there's nothing to complain about. Then suddenly the disease came back. At first it was just back pain. And Kelly thought she'd just broken her back at work. She also cleaned the entrances of the house where she lived. Then her legs started to lose feeling. The doctor said, "What do you want?" Parents after a trauma like that. And they worked hard. And for the last 4 years, Kelly got worse and worse. Now she could barely get out of bed. Cindy, of course, helped as much as she could. But she could see that her friend's life was going badly. And Miranda was a big part of that. Because Charles had lately started drinking beer to begin with, and as if only after work. Then it was replaced by stronger drinks. Lisa even had a fight with him once, sternly demanding that he think about his family. "It's not mine," curved his lips Charles and piano, and two. But a stranger wanted to call the baby girl something strong, but was afraid. And then alcoholism. Raised a finger aloft. Shaky hands is also a hereditary disease. That's me. I'm still the man of the house, so you stay out of it. What's she doing here? Although I think she's a stupid girl. Miranda, your wife is wasting your money. I don't come to you for money, Lisa replied. She was disgusted. This man, he was not worthy of her friend. In general, such a bright, kinder Kelly should not have happened. Lisa, by the way, the truth, did not take money for preparing the little girl for school and all the other additional activities with her persuaded Kelly to accept the help of someone, and was uncomfortable. Close the window. Charles came into the kitchen. I can't breathe in the apartment. Would you at least mop the floor once in a while? Lisa replied, wash the floors. Are there no women in the house? He pointed his finger in the direction of Miranda, who was sitting on a chair, waiting in a lump. You're a little animal, hoping to escape the eye of the hunter. So rag in her teeth, and off you go. In the village at her age, she can do anything. And this. And then the stepfather drunk again spit on the floor, and the princess will learn. But all to no avail, waved his hand, and went to his room. By the way, the room was divided into 2 parts of the wives' bodies, and in the second half was kind of a nursery. But Miranda went to bed in the kitchen. There was a little couch here. It was all right. The hostess, not paying attention, stroked the Lisa pupil's head. Let's get on with it. What are we doing? Kara is rolling, sailing fast on the blue sea. And I don't know what the subject is, Miranda whispered, tears in her eyes, afraid of her stepmother. Lisa sighed and looked at the words under the picture below, where the sea creature crocodile was drawn. Yes, things had gotten better with school. But Lisa also remembered very well that when her stepfather had gone to the village for a couple of days, she had made great progress. Apparently, it was just hard to learn in the oppressive atmosphere at home. When class was over, Lisa stopped by to see Kelly for a moment. You know how she's feeling. Is there anything I can do to help? Why don't you just go ahead and go? Waving her arms at Charles, who had the news on full volume. He loved watching it. And then he'd go on and on about how wrong the world was. The smart guy's got his life together. Lisa thought in spite and finally left the apartment. Lisa, when I was crossing the courtyard, heading for my place, I called out, "Wait." Lisa, giving my face a friendly expression with a smile. The girl turned around. "Hello, James, the son of my mom's friend's mom and the entire extended family." Lashing out at my wife. In general, James was a nice guy. They'd known each other for about 100 years. He worked as a construction foreman, had no bad habits, went to the club. To do boxing was set on a family of children. In short, he was perfect, even cute on the face. But to Lisa's taste, he was bland, predictable, too calm. He didn't give her butterflies, as they say, in her stomach. Awe, delight. Nothing like that. They'd already gone on dates, sweetie, to an Italian restaurant. They even kissed once, and it was nothing. But on the other hand, Lisa knew in her mind that family and marriage should be built not on romantic fantasies and passions, but on mutual respect, trust, and the ability to compromise. James asked how she was. Lisa said she was fine. He volunteered to walk her home. We slowed down and talked about everything. James shared his joy. His mother had bought a second plot of land adjacent to her cottage. There was nothing on this plot yet, but the improvement would come. Lisa listened to his plans about what kind of house he would build as a vegetable garden. They will break up to eat their own organic, and almost dressed and then appeared heir, if such a thing is possible. But it turned out to be possible because James suddenly said, "Marry me." Theoretically, Lisa assumed that a marriage proposal was just around the corner, but right now, specifically, she was in shock. She stopped and slammed her eyes shut. "We can apply at the registry office tomorrow. Would you take my hand on probation?" On my James found himself hot and sweating. The guy was worried sick. He had long been in love with Lisa and could not believe that she was about to become his wife. But I don't doubt this development. My mom's cousin's sister is married to a restaurant owner named Jasmine. They've arranged for the banquet to be discounted. I made it sound like one thing. Lisa and James smiled widely. "I'm so happy. Wait for me." Lisa's hand pulled back and really didn't like it. Feeling driven by circumstances. But that's what was happening now, blossoming with her. But I hadn't said yes yet. James was changing before my eyes. His smile was gone. His eyes were so pitiful, like he'd hurt a child. "Well, that is," she bounced heavily, took to adjusting the nervous purse on her shoulders. She needed to move, to do something different. The anxiety was threatening to be overblown. Probably a panic attack. I need to think. That's what usually happens when you get an offer. Apparently James had heard of it too, that women are supposed to be given time to think. "Okay, well, I'll see you tomorrow." He exhaled a sigh of relief. She nodded. "Oh, and I still have to go to the market. I will help volunteered as a brave knight to accompany." But Lisa waved her hands. "I'm not going to keep you. I have to go to the market for a long time. And then I have to go to the cosmetics store." She was making it up as she went along. She could barely fight it off. She hurried in the opposite direction of the house, so she lived to tell the tale. Now she had to make a decision. But Lisa suddenly realized she couldn't just say what she wanted, could she? Because, well, I don't love him, she admitted to herself, falling almost to a table in the coffee shop. Laughs and eclairs. 3 pieces tossed to the approaching waitress, barely glancing at the menu. In Lisa's life had so far had only one serious romance with a classmate. But they'd broken up without ever really getting close, because suddenly it was discovered that he was a hunter. Lisa couldn't imagine what it was like to stuff stuffed animals in the apartment. Her husband brought the prey to her head. And then somehow her studies spun and her own life, in which it seemed there was no place for men. She understood the excitement of her parents. They wanted to see their daughter happy, to have grandchildren. But it was also suddenly clear to Lisa that this was a marriage. What if it was a mistake? What if it wasn't always like this? Like her grandmother used to say about her marriage. Lisa happily spooned into the eclairs with fat, creamy chocolate custard. Goodbye diet, but she can afford it. Life is like that. Afterwards, Medovic cakes, Napoleon tiramisu were ordered. Lisa just couldn't stop. Finally, over a glass of milk, she asked for the bill. She reached into her purse for her wallet and found another note in it. She unfolded it and frowned. Handwriting. Miranda's was scrawled with misspellings, but what she read made Lisa cringe, apparently afraid to speak openly. After all, her stepfather was always hanging around the apartment. The little girl decided to entrust everything to paper. The fact that Lisa was shocked by a marriage proposal, made hastily and without romance at all. It all receded into the background because it was urgent to save her friend. Lisa came home and helped her mom cook. Tisha had a lesson with another one of her students. Through the web connection, she remotely set her alarm for 7 o'clock. Just yesterday, Kelly cheerfully said that Charles would leave home early because he wanted to take a quick train ride to his home village and come back in the evening. There was something wrong with the sewage system, and he needed to help his parents. And now Lisa has decided to take advantage of his absence to have a serious conversation. "This is what your daughter wrote," handed her friend a note the next day. came. Miranda opened, walked to the room where Kelly was lying, advanced 100 to the bed, and sat down. "What is it?" Kelly squinted, reading, then rounded his eyes and shook his head. Already she opened her mouth to say something. But Lisa cut her off. "Are you saying the kid's making this up?" "No, I can understand you wanting to keep your family together. But if that's true, there's nothing left to save." The helpless woman's lips trembled as she lay there. Her eyes filled with tears, because the complaints the little girl was saying to her aunt's tutor were true. Charles, indeed, beat Mom at home really no to eat, because Charles' salary primarily on herself spent mostly on alcohol more expensive, because cheap, as everyone was told, liver, daycare. Kelly for a long time strengthened, believed that just this is a difficult period of life. After all, she's completely sick, can't work for her husband, all the household chores have fallen, and since there is no money for a caregiver, I had to take care of her. And this, of course, is not always clean. It's psychologically difficult for a man. But then one day on a remark that he did not boil porridge for Miranda for breakfast and for lunch, there was no hot dinner either. Charles, hurt to the point of bruising, grabbed his wife by the arm and fucked her. She screamed that he was a man and making money, that he was tired of messing around with both of them. And then it was as if the husband made a cruel discovery to himself. He could behave like that. He could take out his anger and irritation on his helpless wife, who was not going anywhere. "But you can't do that," Lisa said, when her friend had finished confessing how they really lived. "You have to do something. You have to break up with him. Break up with him. And then what are you gonna do with me? I'm sorry," she added, immediately realizing how unfair it was to be treated so unfairly by a friend who was always there to help. "But I'd be lost without him. I wish I was healthy. By the way, is there anything going on with the funds?" Lisa asked. It was her idea, by the way, to sell ads to various fundraising charities. "Not really," answered Kelly. The amounts needed were astronomical. And not just for one-time treatment, but for major surgery and long-term rehabilitative care. Charles, "Well, I thought I'd just tell you how thin it was." Charles said that if I went to the hospital, I wouldn't be with Miranda, that he put her in an orphanage. "He's my husband." Said he had the right. And Kelly cried. Cindy wanted to cry too, but instead she told her friend that please don't scare the baby with tears. She went into the kitchen, looked in the refrigerator. It was empty. Ran to the store, cooked soup, chicken cutlets, and more charlotte with apple and cinnamon was going to. Actually at home to help my parents put up wallpaper. But she called and said she had to leave for one class, and I didn't regret cleaning up a little bit. It was for a good cause. If she'd said it straight out, they'd have grumbled. Lisa fed lunch to her friend Miranda and could finally get on with what she had to do. The thing was that she had only shown Kelly one part of the note, and she had torn off the bottom part because Miranda had written something unimaginable. Lisa talked to her about it quietly after lunch. "Miranda, how do you know about Aunt Redhead?" "See," said the bully. "Daddy goes to their house. See, he says, sneaking around like a thief." The named Rick was indeed known in the neighborhood yards as a dashing, ill-mannered boy from a dysfunctional family, and his mother raised him alone. Lisa decided that she would not say anything about the possible infidelity of her friend's husband. First, we have to make sure it's not a childish fantasy. Strange isn't a mistake. Lisa found Rick suffering. The kid got behind the garages with his buddies, and they set up some kind of headquarters, lured him out, barely swore an oath. That she wasn't some neighbor with a complaint about broken windows. In fact, she's an acquaintance of the family, Miranda. "What do you want?" The teenager asked suspiciously. Lisa told him what she wanted. "Well, he comes by all sorts of things. His mom's expecting him again tonight at 10 o'clock. So you'll probably tell his wife everything as usual." Yeah, sure. But Kelly is very sick, and she can't be worried. So we need to think about how we're going to handle this. You adults always make everything so complicated. You can come back tonight and see for yourself." And he explained where to find their apartment. Said that if you go in from one side, the house, there are small and bushes in the suburbs, all the way around, or could you, then literally peek through the window. Lisa only shook her head. A little spy. But she thought the boy's idea was a great one. Lisa, where do you get to all day long? From the threshold of the native apartment, her mother swooped down on the girl and made scary eyes. James came in with a portico, said, "Do you have anything important to say for us?" Lisa almost didn't notice. Here came another trouble. She hadn't even answered him yet, and he was about to announce to everyone at the table that they were going to be married. Making again, as she knew how to do, the most welcoming face, Lisa peeked into the kitchen, where they were already packing for 100. Hello. The move flew to the Mariana Trench. Because James didn't come alone, but with his mom. So it wasn't good at all. Lisa glanced at the clock until hour X, when she was to become a bit of a spy. There was still a decent amount of time left. Ducking down the street was unrealistic, weird for the homies, and it would mess up the weather too. So she had to stay. Lisa changed her clothes, washed her hands, sat down at the table, turned on all her eloquence. She tried with all her might to lead the conversation into the wilds, further distant marriages, and the like, and it was working. Then James suddenly caught her hand again and smiled so big that he almost melted like an ice cream cone in the sun from his own happiness. Lisa felt on her back. It's a boom, a panic of goosebumps. I had Kelly forget this phone, made up a lie on the fly, and pleaded to no one in particular that my phone, her ringtone, which all the household knew, would not ring inappropriately. Lisa now. James reached for her, but she had already jumped up and gone into the other room. She got ready to go out as quickly as ever, without even waiting for the elevator. Because the drive seemed to be boiling in her blood, she ran down from the 10th floor on foot, jumping over the steps in places. The rain had stopped, but the wind was chopping viciously, sharp with damp gusts. Lisa framed her face against it with a squeeze. How good is she? She'd think about marriage. James wasn't a bad guy after all. She'd be like a stone wall behind him. Maybe it's his love that'll keep the marriage together for life and never cheat, never hurt. And the fact that she doesn't love. Maybe that's nothing to married life. Immersed in contradictory thoughts to herself, Lisa reached the right place. She pulled out her phone, turned on the video recording, and quietly walked up to class. The windows did indeed appear to be low, and the fact that there was a vent open allowed her to hear what was being talked about in the room. There was a red-haired woman, the mother of Vitya and Charles. They were sitting at the table and drinking tea, talking. And what Lisa heard came as a shock. It turned out that Charles had been hoping that Kelly would get worse soon, and then, citing the fact that he couldn't provide her with proper care, he was going to put her in some boarding school. What a bastard. Lisa, gritting her teeth. Charles was also rudely dismissive of his stepdaughter, and he was going to take the kid somewhere too. Boarding school. So Charles wanted to become the sole tenant and outright landlord. Too bad there's no way to sell it. But maybe I'll think of something, as the drinking buddy added at the end of his revelation. Heard and seen and captured, but on the camera was enough. Lisa quietly descended the hillside, got out of the bushes. It turned out to be a briar bush, clinging mercilessly to her new dress. What kind of day is this? The girl was indignant, assessing the damage to her clothes, but then laughed nervously at Kelly and her problems. That's who's in real trouble. And the main thing is not clear what to do, how to help. Lisa came home feeling very upset. It took you so long to get the phone. Yeah, she met her mother again on the doorstep. The apartment was quiet. James, my daughter, what are you doing? What the hell is that? What's the state of your clothes? Said the parent, seeing the state of your clothes. Just a little walk in the park, and got caught up. But don't start with James. I'll do the talking. Why did he leave? He didn't want to leave. He wanted to wait for you, but Clara said they had to go. Holly, don't make him angry. The mom-to-be also told me. What he said. So it's clear that you're getting married. Who is clear? Give all you, daughter. Didn't you realize James, your husband? Lisa rolled her eyes. Now Mom sounded like some kind of educated, cultured grandmother. So let's drop this conversation. After all, he's the one who wants to marry me, right? So the decision to make me not too polite, but from the bottom of my heart, replied Lisa. We sighed heavily and shook our heads, but did not say anything more on the subject. We do the dishes, though. It's your turn. Lisa agreed with that. Hands on something while your head is thinking. What's the next step? It turned out to be very useful and sedative for the nervous system the next morning. Lisa wasn't ready to talk to her friend, but she just couldn't find the right words and couldn't imagine how Kelly would live with that awful truth. And if you tell Charles, how will he behave then? Lisa decided to take some more time to prepare some plan. She started to get ready for the next student's class. In general, Lisa always crossed the road strictly on the green and on the zebra. But this time, the bus was delayed because of a breakdown on the route. The students' parents were the kind of people who would change one little thing. Lisa was in a hurry and decided that if she ignored the rules carefully, nothing would happen. And so even though the light was red, she dashed across the street. She won a minute there. She'll be on time. But it didn't work out. And to blame for everything was a thin, high heel of the new torpedo, which got stuck in the grate, literally half a meter from the sidewalk. Lisa started twitching her foot, then turned around at the shrill signal. Eyes widened as a huge black SUV sped straight toward her. She had time to think she could decipher the shoes and free herself. Also had time to think there was no time for that. I squeezed my eyes shut, having time to think one more thought, that it seemed that life should be all flashing before my eyes at such a moment, and she was being silly. And then there was a squeal of brakes. The SUV stopped lightly, poking the girl's blunt nose literally in her legs. Just a little more, and the irreparable happened. Lisa cautiously opened her eyes. Are you sick of living? And immediately met her gaze with the fury of the driver's eyes. Oh, said the girl to herself. When the big man in a leather jacket loomed over her, he had powerful square jaws, but with Rybinskaya unreal blue eyes. Black hair, raised in a fashionable in the manner of the 60s hairstyle up. Stupid, sharp in the face, wearing the fresh copper breath. Lisa felt some strange thrills and goosebumps walk down her back at the proximity of that word. Exactly the Viking of the giant. Then suddenly recognition came. She'd only seen the man who'd broken her friend's life once. But it was that face that was memorized, and now it was right above her. Lisa acted as if on instinct. Her hand flew upward and clashed ringingly. The man pranced. She touched herself on the cheek, then looked down at her palm in surprise. Right there could show in ink the explanation of the deed, almost knocked down by him to the stranger. Scoundrel, I shouted at him and wanted to come at him with my fists and with my handbag, but I forgot that I was stuck, aghast, and awkwardly began to fall. He picked me up. He held her, naturally, in his arms, so she forgot how to breathe. Young lady, calm down. I'm sorry. Are you okay? Are you in pain? Yes, it's my fault. But let's not fight. She's read herself. Why'd you run? I was just a stream of words. And she looked with all her eyes and did not understand why. Why it is so difficult to curse this monster on the spot. Let me go, she whispered. And he gently let her go. Crouched down, grabbing her leg, I deftly turned Kova's leg, so that the heel slipped out of the bars. I had to lean on the man's shoulders to keep my balance. I hate you, I said coldly, as frozen by the word when he took the man for margarine, but then suddenly grinned unkindly too. For running the red light yourself, you fool. No, you're not. You ruined my friend's whole life. And Lisa, always so strong, who never went out of her way for a word, was suddenly torn. You asshole, you're her. She had a baby girl. You're finished. We're gonna get you for what you did. And then she went on to say everything she thought. Okay, stop. Shut up. You either ordered me to or you asked me to. I didn't do anything, Kelly, because my name is Rick, and you're talking about Mason. That's my brother. What brother? You look just like him, don't you? Well, it's not my fault we're twins. Lisa couldn't believe it. The man walked back to the car, came over, and held out his passport again. See, I have a different name. Lisa stood frowning, trying to put this puzzle together. She remembered. Kelly had actually said that her boyfriend had a twin brother, only they didn't get along. I'm sorry, sighed convulsively and wrapped her arms around herself. I was wrong. Yeah, but it's been worse. A brother's legacy. The sky, meanwhile, had clouds somewhere waving in the sky and asphalt. Then the first drops. All right, give me a minute. I'll park properly and we'll talk about it. There's a cafe over there, waving at the sign. Will you tell me what happened there? 'Cause I didn't get it. Lisa agreed. They went in, sat down at a table. They ordered a cup of this flavorful drink. But Lisa didn't even touch her cappuccino. She stared intently at the man across the table. Definitely not. Rick rolled his eyes. How else to prove it? No, I'm not Mason. He is. He's dead. What? The car accident 9 years ago. He was in China then and decided to race on the track for a bet. If that's, well, that's the case. He was a real piece of work, but he was a brother. So what happened? You said he had a kid. Yes. Nodding, Lisa finally sipped her coffee and told the short story of how Kelly had fallen into a vicious affair, how she barely survived, and had decided to keep the baby at the cost of her own health. About how she was suffering now. Rick listened attentively, only occasionally asked short questions. I don't know anything about it, he replied. And for some reason Lisa believed him. I was in New York at the time, and I was still in school. Then I was told that Mason had gotten into some kind of trouble and had left the country. They said he'd given up everything. I came back 2 years after that. My father handed me the business. That's how she's been getting out all these years. I had a niece living in the neighborhood, and I didn't know it. So slammed his palm on the table. So it was just fate that brought us together. I was supposed to leave for Italy tomorrow, but it turns out I'll have to stay late. Business can wait. Or she said no. So, what are we gonna do? I don't know, Lisa shrugged. What do you mean you don't know? Well, you can't leave it like that. It's complicated. The girl already regretted her frankness. After all, this Rick, though he made a nice first impression, was still in the same family. And if even half of the rumors about them were true, they were clearly not people who could be trusted. Lisa suddenly thought about the fact that maybe it was not favorable for them to have a woman who had a child with such a person. In case they, Rick's relatives would take the whole story hostilely. Theoretically, if Kelly had a different temperament, she could try to get them to support her and her child, all be born out of wedlock. In fact, from what Lisa knew of the Smith family, they didn't give a damn about their personal reputations. But still, maybe it wasn't for nothing that her friend begged her to keep Miranda's origins a secret. What's the big deal? Rick smirked and leaned back in his chair. We moved the child's mother to us, and that's it. Where to us? Lisa asked cautiously. Well, home. They can't go on living unsupervised with Charles. Rick looked at her strangely. It's like blood. No. What are you talking about? Kelly's not a thing to be taken and transferred. She didn't want anyone to know about it at all, much less Smith, she added quietly. Now Cindy was beginning to think she had missed something in her perception of Rick. There was something dangerous about him, something that just made her instincts scream. Run. I have to talk to her. Explain that I met you. Tell her you're offering to help, and that's the way it's going to be. Finished decisively and stopped in passing. The waiter slid in with a tray, asking for the bill. My treat. Threw carelessly Rick, and it didn't escape the girl that he was literally considering her without any shyness. Thank you. But I'm so not used to the city. Dropped her chin and left the bills for coffee, plus the waiter for tea. And for nothing. It's as if the man is deliberately provoking intimacy. A girl this pretty shouldn't. And this is where you're overstepping your bounds. Lisa nervously put on a jacket, tangled in the sleeves, sagged under the nose. That's it. I'll call you when I'm going to go out. Did you forget your phone? Rick stopped her with a sneer, and there it was. I wanted to slap him again, but I had to go back and really exchange numbers. When the girl left, the lecturer looked thoughtfully out of the window for a few minutes. Then he dialed the number of the man who had repeatedly helped him out of the most difficult and sometimes risky situations. Boris, are you free? You know, we have a problem. Lisa, of course, was late for class and had to cancel it altogether. And the students' parents said that in principle such a sluggish tutor could not teach anything worthwhile, and so they no longer needed Lisa's services. Before the next lesson, there was about 4 o'clock to eat, take a nap, and go home. Lisa had been chronically sleep-deprived the last few days. It was definitely not enough considering the traffic jams on the roads. So we had to pass the time at the mall. And then, when I circled it for the 3rd time at the city library, where Lisa checked out the first book she could find, it turned out to be a novel. A paperback about a duke and an innocent waif. She opened it to find she didn't want to read it, and she plunged into her thoughts. What did she know about these Smiths? Nothing she'd deliberately learned about them. Well, she'd heard about them here and there. Seems they owned a few businesses in the area, and they were rich in the country, except that Jacob, the father of the family, was said to have made his fortune in the Nenides in a far from honest way. And Noah had raised his son alone. At least Noah had raised him abominably. Or so Lisa thought. Evil in a person can initially exist. No matter how you raise him, there was more. So it was known that Smith owned some business abroad. In Italy, the same Noah was involved in a dirty story, it seems, connected with smuggling something there. He shrugged. Lisa glanced at her watch. Well, it was time. We can go to the student. And for the nuances of electively punctuation marks, forget all about it. The next day, having gotten a moment when Charles wasn't home, he left for work. Lisa stopped by her friend's house, determined to have a conversation. The car, naturally, to protect children's ears from the serious subject, was sat down to watch cartoons, and to be safe, was provided with a bowl of cookies and a cup of cocoa. Kelly, as expected, took everything hard. It cost Lisa a lot of work to calm her friend down and tell her to hang in there. When it was revealed that her first love and abuser had died, Lisa told a small lie because she didn't believe it herself, and tried to convince her friend that if the man knew he had a daughter, he would surely repent and realize what a horrible person he was. Lisa said all this to bring the conversation to the next topic, the offered help from Rick. At first, Kelly had desperately rejected her and didn't need anything. Lisa had to be cruel and say straight up, well, what don't you need? Health to be. Stop it all, I can't do this to you anymore. You're Charles. He's not a husband. He's just as nasty as Mason. No, don't say that. It was Kelly first. But Lisa just handed her the phone and showed her the secretly recorded tape. Then she hugged her tightly and looked into her eyes and told her to hold on, because she couldn't do otherwise, and she couldn't act inconsiderately either. It was therefore in no way possible to tell Charles that his evil plans were already known to everyone. The wise thing to do would be to lay low, to see what use could be made of Smith. Yes, it is Mason who has ruined your life, but my opinion will not change. Help should and can be accepted at least as compensation, including moral compensation. It just so happens, girlfriend, that you have to choose between two evils. Think about your daughter. You'll get back on your feet. No one is forcing you to be friends with these wolves. Lisa smiled slyly. I'm just taking advantage of the help. And then goodbye. You'll live independently with your daughter without any idiots. That was the end of their decision. Going out to her friend's house, Lisa, taking advantage of the fact that it was a day off, went to the beauty salon still a week ago signed up, decided to change the brown in hair color, and hair by a fashionable coloring called California Appellation, with which hair seemed as if in the burnt sun, but looked beautiful. On the way, Rick called, saying they needed to meet and talk. It was agreed that he would drive up to the park. The weather was beautiful. We could talk there too. It looks good on you. So, first, said Rick, when she got to the appointed time and answered and thought she really shouldn't care what this guy thought about her altered style. They walked the field of the park, and Lisa relayed, naturally, only partially the outcome of her conversation with her friend. Rick said that it was not a problem to find the money, and moreover that doctors could get it here even abroad. You don't have to go far, Lisa said. He shrugged. And then the topic turned to her own person, strangely unnoticed. Cindy told him who she was, what she did for a living. Cindy realized that this was not the point of the conversation. She was embarrassed, angry at Rick because he'd started it first. Lisa, hello. It was James' voice, the groom, chosen unanimously by all the family except the bride. He had crept up unnoticed, literally ducked out from behind the bushes, and now looked confused. Somehow he reminded me of Owl, good-natured, and a little clumsy. Who's that acquaintance of yours? Name's Rick, and this is James. He's a friend of mine. She answered, but averted her gaze because she couldn't bring herself to say it. As everyone said, her fiancé can't reach you, gently rebuked James. My mom is asking for you. Hi to her. Lisa bent over, picking a gray dandelion off the ground. Why aren't you getting a haircut? Mom always said hair is long. It's your jewelry. You know it's my hair, and I do what I want with it. What about you? Did you go outside with your mom? I asked permission to go for a walk. She was being snide. I'm sick of it. It's all about your mom. Everything has an opinion. I'm done. She tossed the dandelion to the ground and pushed it on top of him. Rick, on the other hand, completely unashamed, smirked, almost insulted. Yeah, boy run. Who are you anyway? James, I've never seen Lisa so annoyed before. Why are you even bothering with the bride? What about the bride? Rick and bent over, struggling, and suddenly caught Lisa's hand up to her lips and kissed her gallantly, but with a frank and predatory look in his eyes. Accept my congratulations. Lisa was at first dumbfounded. Goosebumps danced down her back. Then her cheeks flared up, and she practically shouted, I have not yet answered whether I agree, and leave me alone. Both turned and ran out of the park. Lisa, James followed, but Rick stopped him by the shoulder. Caught, she wants to be alone. Don't you get it? You've never been in a fight in your life, James, but now you want to. He didn't like this familiarity with Lisa that he hadn't seen before. He didn't like the way he kissed the girl's hand, and the way she looked at him. He felt kind of uneasy and uncomfortable in general. Stay away from her, Kino, as menacingly as possible, and walked out of the park as well. Rick grinned. Just the last thing he wasn't going to do by any means. Lisa was very interesting to him, and now not just as the girlfriend of his big, sudden problem. However, he did not doubt that this problem was solvable, because so far, whatever happened to the Smith family in the end, in one way or another, with greater or lesser losses, and not at all on their part, but everything was solved. Literally, the next day Rick showed up at Kelly's house. Again, they decided together that the most favorable contact, so to speak, was to begin. If Charles would not be around, and so it turned out, he was at work. Rick came with a bouquet of flowers, but after their meeting, Kelly asked Lisa to take Lisa with her, because how could she explain their appearance to Charles? Kelly had wanted to cancel the meeting the day before, to give up everything altogether and not understand how, but to deal with everything on her own. But the case was such that it became clear without the suddenly appeared, like an oasis in front of the wandering in the desert support Rick cannot do without. The thing was, Charles came home drunk. He said he had been reprimanded at work and might be fired altogether. Kelly asked her husband to stay put as best he could. After all, the end of summer was coming and Miranda had to go to school, and nothing had been packed or bought for her yet. But Charles angrily replied that he's the man of the family and he'll decide everything himself. He added that kids are so spoiled nowadays that they can still buy notebooks, all the uniforms, a new backpack is a pampering and a fool's errand. Then he said it quietly, apparently thinking he wouldn't hear. His wife added that he was tired of raising someone else's girl, but he didn't stop there. In the evening, Miranda asked if he would buy yogurt for her. Charles yelled at the girl that they would put her on bread and water, and then she would know how to appreciate a piece and stop whining. That's why Rick Kelly was fishing out of greed. First, I made arrangements with a local clinic. There are some very good specialists here in town. They work miracles, by the way. Well, if you don't mind, you can come in tomorrow for a checkup. Kelly was so quick to marvel. Well, money opens different doors, Rick shrugged. But I need to talk to Sophia. She's our neighbor. She looks after Miranda sometimes. Lisa nodded. I'd look out for tomorrow myself. I have 2 classes. An option, of course, but I can offer babysitting services. No, come on, what are you? That's too much. Kelly objected. And then it's a stranger. And the neighbor, do you know her well? But that's different, Kelly replied. She realized that in her situation such an unexpected care and warning from Rick was a real rescue. But on the other hand, she was uncomfortable taking all this help in an unsettling way. When Rick left, Kelly talked to her friend some more and enlisted her support in breaking the news to Charles. And we decided, by the way, to say that it wasn't a very distant acquaintance who was helping. We moved the conversation to the next day in the morning, because then we have to go to work again. And if we talked in the evening, he would have plenty of time to object, express his opinion, or even make a scandal. Fortunately, Charles only listened and did not even say anything. He waved his hand at the useless, in his opinion, the idea of treatment, and went to work. There again, there was a shortage of goods, and the bosses were looking for someone to blame. The examination took a long time. Kelly thought that she would have to wait several days for answers, but to her surprise, the head doctor of the clinic immediately gave his prognosis that restoration of normal body condition was possible if treatment was started soon. Do not worry about the operation, assured the patient. We have everything to conduct it at the level of the best clinics in America and Europe. Now we need to do some additional tests, and we can set a date. I think, taking into account everything plus the rehabilitation period, by the new year, you will already be able to try to make your first step. Really? Kelly marveled. Tears came to her eyes. When did she ever imagine she could be healthy? Going for walks with her daughter. Then one day, as she dreamed, even go to the sea with her and splash on the waves. She immediately pulled herself together. The sea is far away. The main thing is just to get healthy. Lisa's thoughts in the last few days were occupied with the fate of her friend. There was almost no time for herself. However, it did not care much. Everything in the girl's life had long been subordinated to the usual routine. Classes with students, a little fitness, watching her favorite TV series, plus revision and above, and also household chores. What kind of personal life is there? Even if the relatives seem intent on getting you married as soon as possible. AP, are men in short supply? Lisa asked, carefully, without rushing. Are you molding another jam and cottage cheese? On the day of their big molding, the family gathered at the table and did not do without the topic that unnerves Lisa. No, of course not. It's just that, Mom, and I think James would be a good husband for you. And what I think is of any interest to anyone at all. I'm not arguing. James is a great guy and really would only make a good husband for someone else, I guess. Why? Why don't you like him? Lisa's mom backed up her dad. Well, there's just no spark, the girl answered honestly. Bah, granddaughter, shook her grandmother's head. A spark is dangerous. It happens, but how can a fire happen? Lisa froze, noticed that the dress wet hibernation bored and dumplings to mold. And about the groom to talk about everything. I've had enough of half-finished products, said, getting up and growing palms. I'm gonna go see Kelly. Will you do something with her? A grown married woman. Mom was outraged. Age and marital status are no barrier to friendship, shouted Lisa, already out of the bath. To wash her hands was the way to go. But in reality, Lisa didn't go to her friend's house, but to a completely different address. And she decided to do it without warning, because she wanted to see in person and find out where her friend was theoretically going to live. The fact that it would be better to move out of the house where the husband aggressively cheats under the nose of his wife and is up to no good was no longer in doubt. "Let me in to see Rick Smith. Can you tell me Lisa's name?" Businesslike reported into the intercom outside the mansion, located in a picturesque, ecologically clean neighborhood of the city. But I guessed right. The gate was opened by a guard who was very suitable to play bulldogs in the play because he was very solid and scowling with an expression on his face. After greeting the unexpected guest, the guard led her to the house. Lisa noted approvingly the small manicured garden outside and the stylishly, but not insanely golden, as in the homes of some rich people, as she'd seen on the shows, the furnishings inside. "Hello." Suddenly a melodious girlish voice sounded and a pretty blonde girl of about 20 years old came out into the hallway to Cindy and the guard. She was dressed in a scarlet mini dress. "Hello," Lisa answered and wondered who it was. Rick had said that her father and his second wife were the same age. We maid was not a good-looking woman either, so there's only one possibility. It's Rick's girlfriend. Well, that's expected. "So Lisa, no one talks about you in this, Kelly. I'm glad you came. I was thinking of coming to you guys for the blonde's territory." "Why would you come?" "To meet a relative and her best friend." "Too naive for Rick's girlfriend," the blonde replied. "Oh, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Clara." "Liam," she addressed the guard. "You're free to go," and turned to the guests again. "Come on, Rick in the backyard." Cindy, the blonde, didn't like the overly colorful name. "What a lovely name, too." Thought she'd gone. "What I was wearing to make dumplings. And now, as it is uncomfortable for knitwear on the dress, sweater with stretched into shorts, and it's all for nothing." And what she honest person to be embarrassed in the company of these measures to think she did not have time. Because, having passed through several rooms, she went out to the backyard and found herself in a small cozy garden, in the center of which in a small corral stood a horse of fantastic golden color. And beside him on his knees Rick, he was examining the animal's leg and speaking to it affectionately. "I didn't think these ILs could be like that." He rebelled repeatedly. "That's it. It won't hurt now. You'll stand quietly. Almost everything is already animal doctor." The blonde in red called out to him and waved his hand. "You've got a visitor here, actually." Rick stood up. He looked imposing. It was the first time Lisa had seen him without his jacket. For the warm weather, the man in jeans wore a simple black t-shirt, emphasizing all the muscles of his torso and arms. "Hi." He smiled at Lisa and said, "Not expected, but glad. What are you doing here?" "Yes, here is thinking about the proposal to change the place of residence and wanted to see what you can offer my friend." She answered, "It is important." And the same thing became as mixed. "Here are a dozen more of these options to choose from. So that's great." Clara clapped his hands. "Don't doubt it. My brother will take care of your friend and me. Anyway, it's all terrible." I sighed. "You've got to move on. Kelly and daughter certainly deserve the best." "Brother?" Lisa gasped. "You're his sister." "Yeah. What did you think? He just didn't say he had a sister." "But just a sister. That's my brother, the one who's a bun and sings the female gender. So I'm going to go carefully. I've got things to do." She winked at Lisa. "So you are not only a millionaire, a businessman, a sportsman, but you also deal with horses?" asked Lisa, looking around at everything but the man's definitions. "I'm not an athlete, just good genetics," replied Rick, and pulled out of his jeans pocket apple split in half. One part he handed to the girl you can treat at once. She loves it. Well, if so, taking the juicy fruit, stretched out carefully. in the palm of her hand and awed when the horse picked up the treat with soft, velvet lips. What had happened to her? She hit a piece of iron sticking out of the ground. It was my fault. I should have been more careful where I was going, but she's fine now. Actually, she's an old lady, but as you can see, she's in good shape, my first and only horse. He stroked the animal's neck. My father told my brother and me that there are 2 gifts for New Year's Eve, a horse and a car. Mason chose the second one. I got one, and then their fingers met on silkwood, and it felt like a tiny bolt of lightning struck. Lisa took her hand away and stared down at the toes of her shoes in embarrassment. I actually came here to talk about Kelly. Since you're offering your patronage, it seems silly to turn it down. You don't think Kelly's stupid at all. It's just everything that's happened. Everything that's happened in the last few years. It's really affected her, and I don't want to. I can't let her make the wrong decision because of me. I understand. So you're sort of her representative. All right, Mr. Representative. Ask questions, make terms, we'll negotiate. It was said lightly, jokingly even. But Lisa knew the conversation was going to be serious. Kelly had come to terms with her position over the years. And if in nature there were some stages, which, according to the theory of many psychologists, a person who got into a difficult, nightmarish life situation should go through, she had overcome them in a flash, quickly, being on humility. It wasn't the kind of resignation that seemed to make the world seem black and white, and you didn't care about anything or anyone. Kelly simply decided to let go of the past, not to let it bother her anymore, and to focus on the only and truly important thing, the baby. It was her daughter that was the motivation to get her health back and work harder. It was Miranda who kept the discouragement at bay. True, now it was also necessary to recognize names in great and better motives. Kelly had made many mistakes, and chief among them was her marriage to Charles. Now, after a long time, she realized that she married him out of desperation, because it seemed, well, who else needs her? Orphanage without education of the highest with a child in her arms, and even sick. So she took Charles as a savior, and all his shortcomings from stinginess to neglect, sometimes even contemptuous rudeness to himself, passed by. I thought if it wasn't too bad, it would do. It won't get any worse. But it turned out it could be worse. And now Kelly was just scared. For her daughter. And a little bit for herself. But that fear had only possessed her in the past few days. And now, when a man appeared in her life, outwardly a point of support, a copy of the one who ruined her life in character and intentions, it seems his exact opposite. Now the fear has receded. It was replaced by hope that there is justice in the world. No, Kelly did not expect any fantastic gifts from fate for what she had suffered in the past, but she was timidly hoping that things would just work out so that she could be a healthy mom to her daughter, that they could make a life for themselves, a peace in the world. Kelly thought that apparently the white streak had begun when Lisa came to her and told her about being at the Smith house, talked to Rick about everything, also met his sister, and she seems like a really nice girl. Kelly, however, remembering how Charles had argued again in the morning, that with the needs of an invalid's wife, you'd have to spend your whole life on medication. I agreed that it was better for her to move out. So we're packing. I'll call Rick and have him pick it up. So Charles is already at work until tonight, right? Lisa was a little confused that they weren't moving out, but rather running away. But it was the only option, since she didn't want any scandal at all. And how adequate is Charles? I didn't want to find out in practice. Where are we going? Miranda asked, excitedly, watching Aunt Lisa hurriedly putting all her small belongings into a travel bag. The girl stood nearby, hugging a plush white snow bear with a pink bow around its neck. It had been a gift from Rick, to visit Mommy's friends. Explain to Lisa what would basically even be true. Why won't he come with us? Gingerly asked the girl, and in front of her eyes just blossomed when she found out that he wasn't. There are horses there, Lisa said. Rick will probably let you ride it. They even have a garden with flowers. How am I gonna get to school? I only know how to cross one street. Suddenly, I remembered the girls' upcoming schooling. They'll probably drive you by car, or you'll just go to another school. We'll think of something. You'll need all the toys for sure," asked Lisa with a doomed, wistful network, looking at the shelves, filled with all sorts of stuff, and even in the drawer of toys was piled. Much needed and books needed. And the lamp poked the marketeer with its finger. "Rick of the month. It's all clear with you," sighed Miranda. Lisa shook her head and went to find some boxes to pack it all properly. Charles had no intuition. It just happened to be that day, and got off work early. "Where do you think you're going?" He realized his wife wasn't going to the clinic with her daughter, and so much stuff. But what pissed Charles off the most was that Kelly was being held in his arms by some stranger. I don't care if the wife was singing about people she knew, but that's not the point. It's a stranger being held by some stranger. It wouldn't even be jealousy anymore. It would be creative anger. "Charles, I need treatment." It was uncomfortable to speak in that position. Kelly thought that her crutches had already been put away in the parlor. In fact, Rick was going to put her there. But Charles, what a bad time to show up. It would have been better if they'd just explained everything to him on the phone. "I'll stay at a friend's house for a while. It'll be better for you. I won't trouble Galia, so I'm working." What did she think? Confused with him, already calmed down. "Your wife is in good hands," said Rick, and he sent a smile that made her even angrier. But he also gave me the look that said to stay out of it. It's dangerous. There were a few neighbors nearby, and they were naturally interested in what was going on. "Come on, you guys, calm down. Lisa Kelly is an adult and can decide where she wants to live. Where's the baby going? I'm not letting my daughter in." Clinging to the possibility of control. "Charles, and you adopted her?" Rick suddenly asked. "Who are you?" I choked with indignation. "Charles, I ask you again, did you adopt the girl?" "No, but there's no need to get involved." Your voice is clearly not decisive with a smirk. Rick is as easy as the market and careful to knit porcelain. Set Kelly up in the auto shop, especially after the fact that on the apartment of his wife opened his mouth and mistress's floors below, said Charles added. And without saying anything else, he got into the driver's seat. Lisa and Miranda were already in the cabin, the former in the front passenger seat, the latter next to her mother in the back. The neighbors had heard everything, and now they were so friendly they were rolling over on Charles. He's very brave. He suddenly felt more humiliated and insulted than ever before. "You shouldn't have said that," Lisa said. "You have to put them in their place, otherwise they become greyhounds," Rick replied. "But he's my husband," said Kelly. "We have to call him right away." "What about me? What have you done?" she continued indignantly. "I'm sorry, it's none of your business. Miranda belongs to our K. Smith family, which means her family. And especially whatever happens to her mother is our business." Calmly, but in a matter-of-fact voice, Rick said, "Did you make the right decision in agreeing to your husband moving in? I admit that this man may have positive qualities, but I admit it is purely out of respect for you. But he's clearly not the best company. Now, when you need to get back on your feet." Upon arriving at the mansion, Rick let Kelly take a few steps on her own. But then, seeing how hard it was for her, he told her to conserve her strength and picked her up in his arms again. Lisa walked from the summer, Miranda with her tail on her. She greeted the new arrivals with a brightly colored welcome home banner in the hallway and tossed confetti in the air. Lisa thought it was too much, but Kelly, which rarely happened to her, smiled, and the familiarity of Rick's sister in general was clearly something she enjoyed. The luggage from the car was immediately taken up by one man, Timer, who was introduced as someone like a butler and someone to go to for anything. It also turned out that there was a scary maid Tatiana in the house. The two youngest are Christina and Kathy. There are 3 rooms prepared for Kelly. 1 bedroom for her, a second for Miranda, and an even larger room on the semblance of a hall. And they were all adjoining. "Whatever you need, just say the servants are warned that you are our queen," smiled Rick as he lowered Kelly onto the couch in the living room. "Thank you." Embarrassed, she replied back. "I'll try not to give him too much trouble. Since when did caring become that name? How about we switch to you?" And getting consent, he continued, "I just want to make your stay and Miranda's too most comfortable. And my father agrees with me completely." "Lisa, does Uncle Rick have a wife?" Asked a question out of the blue, Miranda asked, when Lisa took the girl from the living room to show her room. Here, by the way, was there anything to be surprised about? Everything was decorated in white sky blue and pink colors. The crib was not simple, but in the form of a carriage with golden wheels, with a transparent floor and funny plush unicorn. God, Miranda, as she saw all this splendor, lived to squeal with a squeal of amazement, lost the gift of speech. And then she asked this weird question. "Well, I guess not. Why are you asking a little girl?" Just like that, the girl answered and ran off to look at the room. In general, it would be possible to praise Rick, of course, for being so prepared for the arrival of the little girl. But on the other hand, it was too much of a fortune to spend, and all for the reason that you were blazing with kindred feelings for your suddenly acquired kinsman. It seemed strange to Lisa. Not that she didn't believe in people's kindness, but it was alarming. Finally, when she helped her friend get settled in her new place and questioned her in detail about everything about the treatment she had planned for the near future, Lisa was able to leave the Smith home to return to her own place. She had a lot of classes waiting for her with her students. She also had to figure something out with James. The phone was ringing off the hook with his phone calls. When Kelly woke up the next morning, she didn't immediately realize where she was. And when she remembered, she lay there for a few minutes just watching the sunbeam on the wall as it froze and took in the new and amazingly prosperous reality. It was hard to believe that now she had been given the opportunity to live in comfort, to be cared for. Rick had been given the opportunity to choose a few professional dialogue, that society that would be most suitable, and Kelly. Oh, it was a difficult choice, and in general it was kind of timid to use everything that this person was ready to give. But one could not say that about Miranda. My daughter was delighted with her new life. She liked that Rick really let her ride the horse. Naturally, the step he led the mare under the reins, and liked the room where she felt like a little princess, and the fact that you could get at least pancakes, soft cream waffles, or cheesecakes for breakfast. "You're spoiling her for me." Kelly shook her head. She and Rick were sitting in the garden. He had suggested tea on such a warm and bright day outdoors. On the table, in addition to everything for tea, there were also papers from the clinic. One had to familiarize oneself with the proposed treatment package. "I think we agreed on you," smiled Rick. He looked at the young woman so intently that she was embarrassed. "Yes, of course, she'll be so amused. Is it the least I can do? But you don't have to." "You're wrong. You know, I just believe in fate, that many things in our lives happen for a reason. And so far, that belief hasn't failed me, Kelly, unexpectedly." "So, Nolan took her hand. "Yeah, he's touched her before. And that's when you have her in your arms. But it was different now. I will do anything to earn your trust and forgiveness for what my brother did. You're not responsible for him." I opened my eyes and was struck by how strangely my own heart froze for a moment. Such an amazing feeling that hadn't happened in a long time. It had never been with Charles, and I wanted it to happen again. But then there's the scarecrow. "I'm glad you can see me as a different person. And yet we're family, and I want to be there for you when you take your first steps, when you're healthy." Kelly smiled and turned away, pretending to regard the late cello picking nectar from the purple rose. The next few weeks merged into one unbearably long time, because agonizing despite all the doctor's favorable prognosis. The unknown. Kelly, although she wished more than anything to become healthy, was very tired of examinations gathered on uncomplicated terms. I was worried that she'd have to bear all these changes for her daughter. Wouldn't she be worse off in her new home? No, it was impossible to complain about the way they were treated. They seemed to accept their arrival. There was Rick, his sister, and the servants. It's strange having servants at all. They seemed to take it naturally, as if it was meant to be. But still, now Miranda was in an unfamiliar environment and couldn't even play with her old friends. And of course, Kelly thought about what it would be like when it was over. After all, it was impossible that fate smiled so much, that once and for all. And that meant that she would probably have to get better and go back to her usual life. It will be possible to divorce Charles, and there was no doubt about it. It's gonna be long and hard. As for Rick's sister, she turned out just fine. And as shameful as it was to admit it, it was kind of a pushover. Kelly Slaga became a friend. They became close, especially since Kelly was fascinated by what Slaga was doing. In general, my dad wanted me to become a lawyer and not a fashion designer, the girl shared. On this cloudy day, Kelly was at her room, which is actually Led, who decided creative mess, more like a creative studio. The subject matter, however, was matter of fact. Clara was twirling around a mannequin with a crackle of fabric, figuring out, as it were, in whose zeal to copy the material on the dress. Kelly sat next to her in the gurney chair she trusted. It doesn't take long to get used to it. But I'm stubborn. I said I'd run away from home if I didn't, according to me, continued the girl. At this, Kelly shook her head boldly. She personally could not imagine how it is so generally possible to communicate with relatives, if in general you have a good relationship with them. She herself had always dreamed of having a family. Kelly pored over the sketches. It turns out that in half a year, the educated woman was to have a show in Rome. Not yet, of course, as part of the World Fashion Week, but it was already happening. According to Slaga's assurances, it was a start. I wanted to be a designer too. You did. Wow. Tell me why you didn't. I had to make a living, Kelly shrugged. And then she realized how ugly it was to insinuate that someone was rich. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I just didn't get a chance. Yeah, that's okay. We're in the middle of something. Maybe it's time to fulfill a dream. I don't get it. Kelly, looking at a few more sketches, here they were ruthlessly crossed out, and it seems were variations of what now no longer on paper, but in person tried to create a young fashion designer. Well, you can start learning now, answered so simply, as if the opportunity for this already lay. Ready only here is a hand outstretch. Understand, you probably have a talent, and that's a grain of happiness to miss out on in life. And if you don't do what you like, courage. She spoke beautifully, but of course, was cosmically far from the truth. After all, many, very many people are forced to do what they do not like, just to earn for themselves and their relatives. Here, by the way, let's right now, the girl smiled and clapped her hands with her idea. I can, clarified Kelly, and when she nodded, in response drove her closer to the mannequin itself. I can't think of what to do. Right there, and she poked her finger at the mannequin's waistline and lower down the hip line. There has to be training here. I've tried 1,000 variations. It's all wrong. Here you go. She handed Kelly the pearl-headed pins. At first I wanted to refuse food. What does she know about it? But then I bit my lip and thought about it. Determined to get to work. Why not try it? For fun in the process did not interfere, silently watched. Ready, Kelly finally said. And as you can see, it worked. What she meant to say was that it turned out terribly. What else would you expect from an amateur? But then Clara showered her with compliments that it was original, fresh, and airy. And at the same time, the lines, as the fabric lay, turned out to be strict, perfectly capturing the essence of the mood of the flesh. She photographed the dress, went around it, shooting video, making it. This flew to Rome. What do you mean? It flew to Rome. Kelly Margaret, I sent to my teacher. The girl shrugged and gave me the name of a very famous designer. That it was the same one I did. I asked him for an answer. Does my friend have talent? Or should she look for another calling in life? But Kelly didn't understand how that was even possible, which is what she was doing. By the way, the fact that you learned to be a designer seamstress is a very good thing, because you understand the process of making clothes from the inside. Kelly didn't think about it in that way and only had to shake her head. Next, we talked not only about fashion, but also about the near future. Kelly noticed that her new friend had a very unusual, beautiful name, and she replied that it was just her mom, Rick's father's second wife, whom he took when the first one died of cancer, originally from Italy. That's where the name came from. And then it turned out that the day came very quickly when Kelly was to have surgery. The young woman was naturally worried and fell asleep under anesthesia. She was more sure that she was hopeless than the doctor said. But when she woke up, it turned out that the intervention was successful. And then, in the following days, it became clear that everything was even better than the doctors had originally planned. Kelly was on the mend. Of course, there was still a long rehabilitation process ahead. But still, the main thing was accomplished. Charles, by the way, during all this time with his wife practically did not communicate. He and Kelly called literally a couple times. "How's it going?" He didn't ask about her health. He only asked about Miranda because he'd been traveling so much for advice. Turns out he's doing just fine living away from his wife. And as Lisa relayed, he's not even sad. Unfortunately, he's been communicating more and more openly with that redhead from the first floor. Kelly, when she found out, didn't feel anything, but in the sense that she realized that her marriage to Charles had been built on a desperate desire to have a reliable, caring man around. It hadn't worked out that way. As fate had shown, love definitely never happened. She just didn't have the guts to admit it before, because she just didn't see any alternative to living alone. But now everything was changing, and Kelly felt more and more free. Lisa, in the time since Kelly had moved into the Smith house, had lived as she had before. Classes with students small their own joys, James, fortunately, as if to realize that marriage is not a joke matter, and it takes a lot of time to make that decision. But once discontent expressed, repeating the words of his mother that youth passes and that to create a family, it is better to think early. You twisted it like that. Lisa at the temple with her finger, rushing a girl into a relationship by insinuating that the girl is getting old. "You know, honey, I'm going to think 100 more times after this that your candidacy with your mom on top of it is not the best option." James, blushing like a cancer. He apologized and even brought a bouquet of yellow roses. And yellow roses mean separation. "I've heard of that," Lisa grumbled, but she took the bouquet. James was upset. "I've known you too long, since the sandbox to be exact. Let's make a deal. If you're really counting on something serious, then just give me the time not to squeeze my soul out, or the friendship we've had these years will start to, excuse me, disappear." James was in agreement. He agreed to everything now. But he was also determined that he would not back down. Because on the eve of the action you yourself brought, went to visit Cindy, and in the girl's room, the door was not very open. On the table noticed a bouquet of flowers, something lush like orchids. James didn't know about it, and he got suspicious, because there were no holidays at his beloved's house. So someone must have given them to her. Who? Wasn't it the rich man who took care of her friend? James wasn't afraid to lose, because it wouldn't mean anything to go against a man Lisa had known since childhood. But it still didn't feel right. He wanted Lisa to wear a wedding ring, as a married woman, and behave accordingly. Lisa herself was busy with something more important than thinking about whether it was time to get married. In the first place, she was watching her friend, and it seemed to her that Kelly might be a victim of something she couldn't quite understand. But it turned out that the wolf's interest was not simple, all this care. And on top of that, Lisa was a little jealous of her friend Clara. Up until now, in fact, she was the only one Lisa had been close friends with Kelly, and the appearance of a new character in the little company was unsettling. And even more so, she didn't want Kelly to fall under any bad influence. One day Lisa was rushing to class with that very student, a student whose parents had rejected her for being late, but had changed their minds. Lisa was triumphant. She was better than that. She hurried through the city, thinking that she should definitely stop by Kelly's to see how she was recovering from surgery. And suddenly, passing by the summer veranda, almost all in the city clothes they are already on it remained hidden, stretched instead of the walls of the canvas of coffee color. She heard a familiar voice. Rick was talking to someone, and Kelly's name sounded. The girl stopped on this side of the end adjacent to the building's summer veranda. There were hardly any passersby, but judging by the sounds, the talkers were sitting at the nearest table. Are the papers ready? Don't worry, a sample contract. I'll send you out tomorrow. What are our people saying? Well, it's a tricky situation, but I think we should take control of the main thing. From what I've heard, then it became clear that Rick met with his lawyer, and they talked about the fact that, it turns out, Miranda is not just Mason's daughter, but also his heir by law. Since Mason had gotten ownership of a not insignificant share of the family business from her father, it seemed to be about a lot of money. But the real shocker was something else. It turned out that Rick was concerned that Kelly, as the daughter's representative, could take over the business. He had no intention of letting that happen, and his plan was such that Lisa became furious and finally stopped respecting the man altogether. A real monster in the guise of a man, whom she had already as stupid as dollars. This man was already starting to. She liked, and those flowers he sent made her heart tingle. Hearing enough, and fearing that I here will find the exit from the summer veranda was literally a meter away from where Lisa was lurking, and she decided to leave, and realized, by the way, that she was late again. Again, she sighed, stopped, dialed the number of the student's parents, and not wanting to listen to compliments, told herself she wasn't coming. Circumstances forced it. They promised to leave a negative review on all resources. Lisa, with the phone on the ground, did not throw. Here, and that's Rick's fault, too, by the way. I got distracted by my conspiracy. How much did she hate him at that moment? But she got a grip. She had to talk to Kelly soon. Only it was only coming out that it could only be done later, because there was a new class in 3 o'clock, and to let herself lose this student. Lisa couldn't at all. Then Grandma Lisa's mom called. Lisa was not feeling well. Her heart was not up to the ambulance, but naturally the girl hurried home. And so it turned out that it was possible to get to the friend only the next day. And of course, I wanted to talk about everything on the phone. Lisa, I wanted to call you myself and demand that you come. My friend was in surprisingly good spirits, and somehow it seemed to Cindy that it wasn't just about her getting better. It's been an amazing day. Can you believe Miranda said she likes math? Rick suggested a really good tutor. Turns out Miranda's aptitude just needed a different approach. Lisa was in agreement with this until she started tutoring the girl in Russian. She never got higher than a B. Apparently, Miranda belonged to those kids who need a special way of presenting a topic that is difficult to learn. And they're already better will go. The girl would certainly be pleased with the success of a young student. We were about to have a serious conversation on a completely different topic, after which perhaps only now, as emotions had subsided, Lisa thought about the fact that by telling everything to Kelly could cross her all so prosperous present. But it was impossible to keep quiet about it, because then she would be in great danger, and Miranda would be in danger too. Lisa had already taken a breath of air into her chest to start throwing herself into the thick of it. Here, they were suddenly interrupted. Clara burst into the room as a positive hurricane. Dad's here with a surprise. Just now he called. He's on his way. Yay. Smiling brightly, she jumped up to Kelly and took her hand. You need to get changed right away, she nodded, hinting at the house dress, a funny drawing of a mouse. Lisa was a little in shock. The situation was compounding into a disaster already, turning right before her eyes. She had time to learn that Jacob Smith was, in fact, the real master of the entire family business empire. It was he, not Rick, who made the key decisions, which meant Lisa realized she had to act decisively. Where are you going? Ockled her as she hurried to the door. Kelly, I need to ask Rick something urgent. She dropped what she had in mind. Now she could only hope they were rich people who had no conscience or decency left, would listen to her, and if they didn't, Lisa hadn't decided what to do in that case. But she had no doubt that she wouldn't let her friend get hurt. After all, the operation had already been done, and successfully, so Kelly would be less dependent on this family. Damn it. Where's Rick? The maid caught her in the hallway. He's in the study. But Jacob ordered, not listening to anyone, rushed further into the study, flew into it without knocking, without invitation. The dare of a puppy. The tall, gray-haired man slapped the man standing in front of him, Rick, with a hard swing. Lisa froze and stepped over the threshold. Ouch. Immediately it was clear the scene was clearly not for strangers' eyes. The men turned to her in sync. The one who was apparently Jacob, the head of the family, looked unhappy to have interrupted a thorough conversation with a guilty son. Rick, confused, they could see that they were very uncomfortable to be seen in this light. I told you not to bother. Who the hell are you? Coolly threw the man. Lisa girl at first wanted to apologize and go out, but realized that this man, it is weakness immediately smells, and therefore with him to deal with. How scary, as if the wolf took human form and is now looking into the soul, thinking about attack or wait. I'm Kelly's friend, she clarified, and stepped boldly forward. I know everything, I know what you're up to. That's how the role of the older man bent. He grinned. How interesting. Interesting. Lisa, who was no longer afraid at all, erupted, and she said everything she thought about Rick and Rick's sinister plan. And then something began to dawn on her. She suddenly, as she considered the emotions, Rick's father's anger, confusion, and vulnerability. And she even thought that if you began to be a gray-haired man gesturing for silence. Lawyers, thankfully, work for me, not him. And then last night I got the curious news that my own son had decided to follow in his brother's footsteps. Rick, tell me, did you think I wouldn't find out anything at all seriously? Like I didn't know you were coming? Yeah, your accounts are kind of on lockdown, by the way. What did I explain? Well, try me, but later. In the meantime, I must apologize to this lovely girl. He turned to Cindy again. I'm sorry the case was delayed. I should have dropped it and come down here. Once I found out I had a granddaughter. Why don't you sit down? We need to have a serious talk. Cindy was beginning to think that everything that was happening was not real, that she had become the heroine of a movie, a drama, and a thriller. The questions were finally answered. Lisa's panic and fear for her friend was justified. It turned out that Rick was planning to fall in love with Kelly and marry her, as well as adopt Miranda. Thus, he would have full power over the little girl heir to his brother's fortune. And what's more, Jacob Smith stated in almost direct text that his son had no intention of treating Kelly well and with care. Apparently, he wanted her on a purely formal basis. Dad, but I wouldn't. Rick started to start, but his father gave him a look that made him hesitate and shut up. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted. You're not supposed to breathe without my permission now. I'm sure you'd